Are we streaming live on Scituate?
I think we are now.
Teeing that up right.
That's live. Ready, set, go. Are you admitting,
Yeah, let's
Brianna,
do
or do you need us to do that?
it.
No, I can listen. Do you want everyone to come in all at once, or do you want just the applicants?
Yeah.
Everyone all at once? All right, I'll do that. And you are now live on Facebook, just so you know.
Fantastic. Give everyone a moment to connect and whatnot. Everyone, one more second.
Jane, are we waiting for Janie to do minutes? Here she comes. Jane.
All right, everyone, good evening and thank you. Welcome to the February 25th meeting of the Town of Scituate Zoning Board of Appeals. A quick note, in response to Governor Baker's declaration of a public health emergency and the related emergency executive order dated March 12, 2020, Town of Scituate public meetings shall meet remotely until further notice. This meeting will be recorded and can be viewed live on Scituate Community Television's Facebook page, and the recorded meeting will be available the following day on Comcast Channel 9 and YouTube. Obviously, if you are here, the meeting, you recognize that the meeting is available on Zoom, and the Zoom instructions are available on the public hearing notice on the zoning board's website through the Town of Scituate. With that taken care of, we're going to call the meeting to order. And our first application continued from January 21st, 2021 of Brian and Melanie Legge, care of Walter B. Sullivan, requesting a variance to allow for the construction of a 30 by 15 swimming pool and a 10 by 12 foot pool house on the south side of the lot closest to Parker Avenue on a non-conforming lot at 9 Moreland Road in Scituate. Attorney Sullivan.
Good evening. I had earlier emailed this week a request for another extension. And I know that we have extended this before, including on January 21st. The reason for the extensions in the past is we were trying to get information from Maddie Legg's therapist that supports the pool that we seek to build under this variance. Maddie had to change schools and now goes to a school in Lexington. Because of the pandemic, there hasn't really been any meaningful therapy. That is about to change because they're vaccinating the students. So we would request the indulgence of the board for another 30 days so that we can supplement the material that was requested from her therapist who actually treats her. Maddie has previously was at St. Coletta's, but has never worked with this therapist with whom she's in the charge of right now because of the pandemic. So we would ask the indulgence of the board for another 30 days.
I'd move to accept the request for the continuance 30 days until the next regularly scheduled meeting of the ZBA.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor of granting the continuance to, that would be March 18th, our March 18th meeting.
Tibbetts, aye.
Seeks aye.
Tom, Susan?
I think I abstained from this one.
That's right. Susan?
Aye.
And Anthony Bucari, aye. The ayes have it. Walter, thank you for the quick explanation, and we will see you on the 18th.
Thank you very much. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night. We
Take care,
appreciate
Walter.
it.
All right, we're going to move on to our second application of Brian and Nancy Jones of 6 Michael Avenue in Scituate, requesting a special permit finding in accordance with MGL 48 Section 6 and or Section 810.2 of the Scituate zoning bylaw to allow for the demolition of 2 pre-existing non-conforming accessory structures and the reconstruction of attached garage addition to the pre-existing non-conforming single-family dwelling at 6 Michael Avenue.
Chairman Bashiri,
Yes,
could I make a motion before we get started to move the fifth application up and take the application on the theater last in this today?
I think you certainly can make that motion. And I would second that motion. I'm confident that we're not going to inconvenience the theater application quite too much, and we'll be able to take care of that fifth application and then move to the theater, which I think we all think is going to take a bit more time. So I'd second that.
Tibbetts, aye.
Kavanaugh, aye.
Teixius, aye.
Harrison, I.
Bucieri, aye. We're so moved. Sorry for anyone that inconveniences, but obviously that's a big application. I'm sure that we have a lot of public here for that. We'd like to get some of the more straightforward ones out of the way so that we're not delaying else while we get through the meat and potatoes of that application. Anyway, back on to the 6 Michael Avenue application. And let me see.
So, Anthony, just to be clear, the paperwork on 6 Michael Avenue, the
Yes.
application is for a variance. At least that's how it's requested.
I believe that the word variance is mentioned in the application. It is not mentioned in the public hearing notice. And I would contend, I certainly want to hear from the applicant, but I would contend that I'm of the opinion that they very well may not need a variance. I think that may just be a misused word in some of their application material.
I do not disagree. I just wanted to make it clear that the application itself is an application on the form for a variance. So we need to resolve that.
Absolutely. And given that, is the applicant available to unmute? Do we need to unmute them?
Yes, good evening. I think on the screen it says Nick Jones, but I'm Brian Jones.
You promise?
And
What'd
here
you
with
do
me tonight is my wife, Nancy.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome.
Well,
If you could please
Thank
tell
you.
us a little bit about your application.
yes, first of all, with regard to the variance discussion that we just had, right after it was submitted, we received a call from your office pointing that out, and that it would be handled internally and the notices would go out as they should. So I hope that's okay. Otherwise, we would have amended that. Our mistake, not a variance.
We're working within the 4 corners of the notice, so I think we're fine.
Thank you.
Agreed.
So should I just go through this briefly? Would be great.
Please.
As I mentioned, here with me is my wife, Nancy. We have lived here at 6 Michael Ave for the past 20 years, and we've been in the neighborhood for 13 years before that. So been around here a while. And as was mentioned, we're here before you tonight to request a special permit finding to allow for the demolition of 2 pre-existing non-conforming accessory structures. They're both garages, and for the reconstruction of an attached garage addition to the pre-existing non-conforming single-family dwelling. I'd also like to mention that, with an apology about here, is that we actually came before the board back in 2007 with this same request and was granted the special permit at that time. So we find ourselves back before you again. We didn't go ahead with the construction at that time. There was quite a financial crisis in 2008, and we put things on hold. And with a 2-year limit on that finding. We're back before you because we're ready to revisit this. The two pre-existing structures are each about a half foot off the rear lot line. And we are proposing that the new addition will match the existing rear setback of the primary dwelling at 14.7 feet. And I guess that's my presentation.
Thank you very much. I think the only question I had is the existing garage is single story
Yes,
and the proposed garage, will it have living space above it?
yes.
It will. Okay. I think I am good.
I can just ask a direct question. Is there a significant difference between this application and the one that was presented in 2006?
No,
Okay, the additional dwelling space increases the square footage by 16%, so it doesn't hit the 20% threshold.
correct.
Okay.
To me, it looked like the same application as previously. Meets the side yard setback.
Yeah, it's not more non-conforming than the house is already. I think the removal of the garage is really just an added benefit. We're getting rid of a somewhat extreme non-conformity and then basically doing an addition on a non-conforming structure.
Agreed.
At least arguably not at least an offensive intensification, if it even is an intensification.
Any public comment?
George and Susan, before we do, anything to add? No,
Nothing by me.
I didn't either. It was clear, the application. Thank you.
of course. Bob, anything else?
I would only caution that this cannot now or in the future be an accessory dwelling, because one of the criteria for that to be an accessory dwelling would be it must meet all setbacks. And this board's decision on this particular project doesn't waive what the planning board requirements would be in that situation.
Understood.
Thank you, Bob. With that, to the public, we're going to open it for any public comments on this application, and we would ask that you raise your hand, either using the Zoom feature or by showing us your video and actually raising your physical hand. So if anyone has anything to ask or comment on the 6 Michael Ave application. And I do. Brianna, please stop me if you are seeing something I'm not, but I do not see anyone seeking to comment. We
I don't
have
see any.
John
I don't see
McCabe.
any either.
John, I think you've unmuted. Please go ahead. Just
Okay, sure. I thought I had a video connection here, but I'm having a little internet problem. But
no problem. You do now. Just your name and your address, please, for the
Sure.
record.
John McAteer with at 22 Collier Road in Scituate, and we abut Brian's property, and we feel that what he's proposing would be an enhancement to the property.
Thank you very much. All right. If we have anyone else in the 6 Michael Ave application? I don't believe we do. All right. We're going to close the public comment section, and
I'll make a motion that the board grant the applicant special permit under Citrus Zoning Board zoning bylaw 820, section 1020.2, and finding under Mass General Laws 40A, section 6, that the proposed raise and reconstruct of the 2 existing non-conforming detached garages located at 6 Michael Ave, Massachusetts, and replace them with the extension of the pre-existing non-conforming dwelling structure as presented in the applicant's is not substantially more detrimental or injurious to the person's property or improvements in the vicinity, and that to the degree that it may be, it is inconsequential, as shown on a plan dated 12/28/20 by the titled Garage Office Addition, Jones Residence, 6 Michael Ave, by Rivermore Engineering.
Second.
All those in favor?
Seeks aye.
Tibbetts, aye.
Kavanaugh, aye.
Harrison, I.
There we go. The ayes have it.
I'll take that one, Anthony.
Thank you very much, Tom. And thank you, Brian and Nancy. Best of luck with your project.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
I hope
Have a good
it
evening.
doesn't bode for another financial crisis,
Yeah, I
please.
know. Get that thing done.
Take care.
All right, we're going to move on to our third application of Joseph and Maura Burke of 17 Burtis Adams Way in Westboro, requesting a special permit finding in accordance with MGL 48, Section 6, or Section 810.2 of the Scituate zoning bylaw to allow an alteration to a pre-existing non-conforming single-family dwelling at 89 Marion Road in Scituate.
Hi, I'm Paulette O'Connell. I'm here on behalf of Joe and Maura Burke. They're online, or Maura's there. Well, so as you noted, the existing lot at 89 Marion Road is non-conforming. We had sent in a site plan by Morse Engineering, and the existing home itself does meet all setbacks and is conforming within that. The plan is to add a 3rd level to the house, so we will not be changing the footprint of the existing structure, but we are adding 500 square feet, which is 27.2%. So we are over that 20% threshold. So we're here seeking a special permit to add over 20% to a non-existing lot per section 810.2A.
Thank you, Paulette. I'm all set. Do any of my fellow board members have any questions?
Just a clerical aspect, Paulette, you're representing the applicant as,
As the architect?
you're the architect.
Okay.
So now I can say nice things about the plan. The rendition looks fine. My main question was whether or not there was any change in the footprint, and as there is not, we're purely looking at a 20% increase, greater than 20% increase question on this. They obviously can't change the lot. They're not changing the setbacks. They're just increasing the size of the property.
I would agree.
And we meet all height requirements, right?
Yeah, so the new height will be 29'3" to the average height of the roof, and then it goes about 5 feet taller than that. So we're under the 35 foot.
Perfect.
This is actually probably stretching beyond but I'm just curious. You've done an evaluation of the foundation, and you're comfortable with that you won't be in a compromised situation.
We do the structure. Well, we were making sure we got approval today, and then the structural engineer and I will be crawling underneath the house to confirm everything.
I can think of at least one occasion where we had a situation where we approved it, and then it turned out the only reasonable option was to raise and reconstruct, but that's not what you're asking for today, and that's not what we would be granting, because that was not the application.
Yeah, no, the builder was pretty confident that we were good with what we've got there. So we will definitely do our due diligence. And if for some reason we need to come back in front of that for a different reason, we will. But right now we're just looking for the 20% increase.
Great.
Susan, you could just nod your heads if you're good.
No, I'm good. I'm good.
I'm good.
I think,
I didn't
I
have
think it
any
looks nice.
Straightforward.
I like the architecturals.
Bob, did we miss? Bob?
I'm sorry, I'm good.
I think so. All right.
Yep.
We would ask the public, again, you could raise your hand using the Zoom feature or just raise your actual hand and we'll check out the video. If you have anything to comment or question regarding the 89 Marion Road application. I do not see anyone seeking to comment.
I can make a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
On the application of Josa and Mara Burke of 17 Burtis Adams Way, Westboro, Massachusetts, for their request for a special permit and finding pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 48, Section 6, and Section 810.2 of the bylaw, that the proposed alteration of the pre-existing non-conforming single-family dwelling at 89 Marion Road, as depicted on the plan prepared by Morse Engineering, looks like dated October 28th, 2019, that if constructed pursuant to the plan, does not create any new nonconformities or intensify any existing nonconformities, and then to the effect that it does, it's not substantially detrimental to the neighborhood.
Second.
All right, all those in favor, Bucieri, aye.
Teixeira, aye.
Kavanaugh, aye.
Aye.
Harrison, aye.
The ayes have it. Thank you very much, and I will be happy to need to take that decision.
I can do that one, Anthony. I got to catch up because I wasn't here last meeting.
You're a man of honor, Mr. Kavanaugh.
Glutton
Yeah.
for punishment.
Yeah,
Some say that.
either that or you know it's coming next month.
How would I know?
I don't know. All right, thank you, Tom.
No problem.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Very much, Paula and Maura.
Have a good one. Thanks.
Good luck.
All right, folks, given our earlier motion to just swap things around a little bit, we're going to continue on to our fifth application of Alfred M. Boyajian of 94 Marion Road in Scituate, requesting a special permit finding in accordance with MGL 48, Section 6, and or Section 950.3 of the Scituate zoning bylaw, or any other relief or advice the Board of Appeals may grant to allow for the construction of a single-family dwelling at 43 Oceanside Drive in Scituate, and that the requested relief be granted on this basis that the current locus is a vacant lot created prior to the adoption of zoning in Scituate, and that no setbacks are required. Mr. Or your representation, are you available?
I think Mr. Marabito's on.
Might be. I actually don't see Paul.
Should be. I admitted him, so he should be here.
Oh, how do we get in?
Yeah,
You're in, Paul.
You're in.
We can hear you, Paul. There might be a video button in your bottom left of your screen, but
There it is. Okay. I think Stephen Casaros.
Yes, Steve Casaro for the applicant, Fred Boyajian, an attorney from Tefagton, McDonald and Dogan.
hello, welcome. Well, Steve and Paul, if you can please tell us a little bit about the application.
Actually, I'm going to let Paul take the lead on this to start.
Okay, this is a request for
finding a special permit. This is a pre-existing non-conforming lot. Back by way of history, back in, I believe, 2006, there was an existing home that was well over 100 years old that was raised and reconstructed. That house last year was moved from its foundation and moved down to 33 Oceanside Drive by Mr. Boyajian. In its place, he's proposing to reconstruct that dwelling in the footprint that's shown on the plan I filed with the application. The footprint of the proposed house is virtually identical to the one that was approved back in 2006. The only nonconformity is the setback on Oceanside Drive. There are three setbacks from streets here. If you look at the upper portion of the lot on 11th Avenue, the structure is set back 30.3 feet. The required setback is 30 feet. On Marion Road, there's a chart on the plan that shows that the average setback on Marion Road is 26.9. We're proposing to place the house at 27.4 feet, or an additional 6 inches into the lot. On Oceanside Drive, the corner of the house is 23.3 feet from the property line of the street. That's in the same location as the house that was there roughly 100 years ago, and the house that was there last year as well. We also show the lot width lines on the plan as we measure them from Oceanside Drive. Oceanside Drive being the street address. The closest one to the street is 114.8 feet. It's just required to be 100. The line through the middle of the house is 93.5. It's slightly less than 100. And then the rearmost portion of the house is a lot width of 54.9 feet. So the nonconformities, it would be the lot width in two locations and the front yard setback. But again, those are the lot widths and setbacks of the previous two homes that were on the lot. The lot only contains 7,578 square feet. We have been to the Conservation Commission for this. We did get an order of conditions for it. There's virtually no change in the grades on the lot. The grading on that lot was changed when they built the new house about 8 or 10 years ago. So I think with that, I'll end my presentation and entertain any questions you may have, unless Steve, you want to add something to it, to the presentation.
No, not at this time.
Okay. Oh, just one thing, the applicant did file for the building permit, and the building inspector, Bob Vogel, reviewed it and indicated that we should file the application that we have filed with the zoning board. So that's the reason for our presence here this evening.
Certainly. And so, Paul, just give us a better idea of timing. When was the structure on the lot removed?
Last year.
Do you know approximately when?
March.
It might have been early summer.
Sure.
Because we went to conservation for that as well. And there was an appeal to it. So the house couldn't be moved till last year. I'm not sure the exact date, Anthony, but I believe it was early summer.
Sure. Okay.
I've got a couple of questions.
Please, Ed.
Paul, you indicated that from Oceanside, it's 23.3, but the covered porch is 8.6. So that would be our measurement from Oceanside. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. That's fine. And there's a couple of matters in this. There was a 2009 decision of the board, one of the few months that I wasn't on the board. But it was to raise and reconstruct on this property, and it was granted. Obviously, it lapsed prior to the removal of the house on the lot. But at that time, it was understood by the board that basically, is this proposal significantly different from the 2006 proposal? I mean, 2009 proposal?
No. As I mentioned in the presentation, the footprint of this house is virtually identical to what was built before. Mr. Boyajian had a house designed for the lot, which is almost identical to this. What it did was, what this house is doing is to replicate the old home that was there, which is the home that he actually grew up in. He got the permits, and then the owners, who were cousins, sold it to someone other than Mr. Boyajian.
Okay. I think it's we've got a timing question here more than anything else. If this had been done in a timely manner from the prior ZBA decision, you wouldn't need to be before us because you'd be under that decision. In your presentation, you started by saying that this is a pre-existing lot and therefore setbacks don't apply. I would argue that that's factually incorrect. There is a understanding, I believe, in the law, and please, all the attorneys around me, please help me understand this better, but there is an understanding that an isolated lot, one that has never been built on and never known contiguously by an adjoining property, can be considered a pre-existing non-conforming lot and not subject to setbacks. But this property was clearly developed. It clearly is subject to setbacks. It clearly is subject to the ZBA review process. And I'm not against it in that respect, but I just don't want to be finding that because someone voluntarily removed a structure from the lot, that it continues to be considered an isolated lot because it's been removed. My feeling is it's clearly subject to setbacks. It's possible that Mr. Casaro might have some opinion on that, but that's my.
Actually, Ed, I would agree with you, and that really the focus should be on the special permit finding that this is a raise and reconstruct of a pre-existing non-conforming, and really this is a structure that is staying within the footprint of a home that has been there for over a century, basically. So clearly, I would say that it's not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. So that's the argument that I would focus on, and not the vacant lot argument. I wouldn't disagree with your position there.
I think really what we're looking at here is we probably should have seen this application prior to the building being moved in order to update or to at least reconsider the lapsed special permit or special permit finding from 2009. But that's my position on it.
I think this year maybe you get a pass for doing things a little bit out of order.
Also, too, since that decision was issued, you had a change in ownership. You had the construction of a different home, and so there are a couple of intervening sort of events that also to make it a bit different. But yeah, I would agree with you though that the moving of the home to 33 Oceanside does not, as a result, qualify this as a vacant lot under the law.
And in a normal situation, in a normal year, I would argue that the challenge here is that when one removes the house, relocates it, or demolishes it, they lose the pre-existing non-conforming aspect if it's a voluntary demolition, and would not want that to be a standard by which the board considers applications in the future.
Actually, can you repeat that, Ed? You were a bit broken up there. I want to make sure I understand that point.
I think that my concern is that under a normal situation, we're one to demolish or relocate a house, a lot that was pre-existing non-conforming, the fact of the voluntary removal of the structure they would forfeit the existing non-conforming to setbacks. In this situation, again, was moved during the COVID crisis. There was a prior finding from the ZBA, although it was not timely, it was consistent with this application.
I'm sorry, I would just ask that if anyone who's not speaking, especially if you're not on the board or involved in this application, if you could please mute your Zoom. I see just a couple of folks here in the Zoom that aren't muted, that don't appear to be involved, and I'm having trouble muting them myself. But we're just to avoid background noise, please see that you're muted. Thank you.
So anyway, that would be my concern, just simply that that the public knows, and that the board recognizes that there's unusual circumstances here, that we wouldn't be looking at a voluntary demolition or relocation of a structure as a means to waive setback regulations. In fact, it would in fact require that all setbacks be applied, because the pre-existing non-conforming aspect would be lost with the voluntary destruction of the structure. No one's arguing?
I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now, Ed?
Yes.
Hello? Okay. Okay, no, I'm good.
Anthony, I think you're muted. Anthony, you're muted.
I was just saying, Ed, I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. I think that the change that we have here is that obviously it's a little bit of an interesting year. It's even more clear what the intention always was here, given the prior application. And so I think that draws the distinction from a more simple voluntary removal of a property and then going back and seeking to have your pre-existing non-conforming status. Susan, Tom, George, anything else to add?
Nope.
Bob? But you're muted now. I created a cluster. I apologize.
I just want to mention that the abutter, excuse me, Hamacher, did come into our office very late in this today. I couldn't get information that he supplied to the board, unfortunately. Tried to scan it and email it, but our system was down, unfortunately, again. At any rate, his questions had to do with setbacks and his common property line and whether that was a side yard or a rear yard. We discussed that. And also some general comments about the situation that seems to have evolved in that neighborhood of a lot of activity centered around bed and breakfast or Airbnb sort of functions, so to speak, rather than single family homes. He said he might be calling in to this meeting this evening, so I just wanted to speak up and alert the board, and B, if he is on, to apologize to him for not being able to get his information to the board in a timely manner.
Thank you, Bob. With that, I think Susan and George and Tom, I think you indicated you were all set, but please speak up.
All set.
I'm all set. Thank you for the clarifications, though.
Of course. And we would ask that if any members of the public have anything to ask or comment on this application at 43 Oceanside Drive, if you could please raise your real or digital hand. I do not see anyone seeking to comment.
Got a couple. They've got AG and Jen and Stephanie Burke.
Yeah, it looks like we have 3.
There we go. All right, we're going to unmute Stephanie. Hey, Stephanie, are you able to unmute yourself? There you go.
I'm Stephanie Burke. I'm 93 Marion Way. I just wanted clarifications. I'm still a little confused on the setbacks, and it's just going to be what was there that was just moved correctly, right? It's not. I guess I'm confused on the setbacks, but just by the way it was listed on the notice. To my understanding, it's going to be to the exact footing of the house that was just moved and not anything that was there decades ago. Is that correct? If you could just clarify. I'm sorry that I'm just confused by that.
No, that's all good. So you probably don't have the plan in front of you, but that is, I'm not that familiar with the prior house, but that does sound correct. It's going to be 10.2 feet off of the lot behind the home, and then about 27 feet off Marion Road, just over 30 feet off of 11th, and the covered porch will be about 8.5 feet off of Oceanside. All consistent with the home that was there previously.
Okay, because I was just confused the way it was listed at the ZBA, and I tried calling for clarification, and I just missed timing up, but I know that I know the owner, and he wanted to replicate a house that was there before. So I had never seen the house that was there decades ago. I saw the house that was just moved to the other side of Oceanside. So I just wanted to make sure with the way it was listed was it said regarding the setbacks, and I just wanted to make sure it wasn't gonna go over. That was all. So thank you.
Of course.
I think for clarification, the setbacks off of Marion and 11th are conforming. The non-conforming would be the rear yard setback to the lot, the Hummucker lot, and the front yard setback off of Oceanside, both of which are consistent with the prior structure. Is that correct, Mr. Maravito?
You're muted, Paul. Sorry. Paul, you are still muted. Sorry, can I assist you with that? Let's see. There we go.
Hear me now?
Yes.
All right. I would say that the setback of 10.2 feet at the rear of the house is conforming. We viewed that as a side yard, and the only non-conforming would be the covered roof off of Oceanside. Other than that, all the setbacks on 3 sides are conforming, in our opinion.
Thank you.
And then
I would agree with that. The 3 streets make 3 front yard setbacks, and the single property line that goes between 11th and Marion is a side yard setback. There actually is no rear yard to this property.
okay. And then I guess my other question was, this is just for the building in regards to the setback. There's nothing in regards to the mounting of property as to create, I don't know the official language, but to make sure it's not, mounded to create the water to drift away from the property, right? That would be a separate meeting planning.
Are you referring to the grading of the lot?
Yes.
Yeah, the grading is virtually the same as what you see there now, and that was reviewed by the Conservation Commission. That was last fall when we had the public hearing to construct a new home here.
Yes, okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, we're going to, it looks like we have an AG looking to comment. And now you look to be unmuted.
Hi there. My name is Amy Grosier. I'm at 72 Kenneth Road. I'm just curious about the, I don't know whether it's appropriate for this meeting or not, but the, as Mr. Hamaker mentioned, the use of this house. I know that it's going to be a single family house, but its intention, I believe, is to be part of that Airbnb rental functions kind of thing. Does that have any bearing in this at all?
So, Bob, can you speak to the code's regulations of the renting, whether it be short-term or long-term, of a single-family home?
There really is nothing on the books, either in our zoning bylaws or I believe in state law that speaks to this situation. I know some cities, Boston among them, Paris among them, San Francisco. Anyway, they recognize that this is an issue. They've tried to legislate it for a couple of reasons to limit its prevalence and also, frankly, to be able to track and tax the income coming to the owners of these facilities. But as far as regulations that can be enforced in Scituate, there are none.
That was my understanding as well, and I would agree as far as state law. So to the extent it's still being used as a single family home, even if being used by a short-term renter as a single family home, it would be in compliance with certainly the zoning bylaw, and to my knowledge, and it sounds like Bob's as well, really the extent of the code in the town of Scituate.
Gotcha. Okay. Was just curious. Thank you.
I think there's an Elizabeth Stokes.
Good evening. This is actually her husband, Roland. We reside at 87 Marion Road. Question, if I may, to the board. What is the height limit, or what is the height that this property is proposed to go to?
Bob, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, the height limit for single-family residence with a typical gable roof is 35 feet to a point halfway between the eaves and the ridge, and a maximum of 40 feet to the ridge itself. This home, as I understand it, would be within those limitations, and certainly we will review that when the time comes to issue a building permit.
So the property at 92 Marion Road, which clearly exceeds all of those heights, and is coincidentally the first of these now 5 Airbnb, VBRO, whatever the initials are, available on the market for wedding parties and up to 30 people at a time within the same block, clearly constitute a nuisance to the neighborhood. There are parking issues. There are many noise issues, as you are very well aware of. I'm just concerned that we are encouraging this creation of a compound of clearly no longer single-family homes in this area.
It wasn't so much a question, but to the extent it needs a response, I think those are all valid concerns. I think there's certainly a line in some of the situations you're describing where something is being used as more than a single family home, but obviously that's quite tough to preemptively regulate. It's within our code. If I lived in the Berkshires and I wanted to Airbnb this home with my 2 children, my wife, that would be perfectly within our code. If I wanted to throw a rager with 40 friends, that maybe it's not, but I think that unfortunately, for better or worse, needs to be handled on a case-by-case basis in real time. But your concerns are certainly valid and may warrant further discussion, but changing the code or regulating that further is a bigger conversation that really involves town meeting and not the ZBA unilaterally.
Understood. Thank you for that. One last point, if I may. I would plead that the board removes the language that this is in any way a non-conforming lot, because the individual involved here has proven, again with 92 Marion Road, to be very adept at manipulation.
We will certainly keep an eye on that, but I'm not personally overly concerned about manipulation here. There are aspects of this application that are non-conforming. I think we established pretty well it is subject to setbacks.
Dishwasher.
Again, just a reminder on the muting, please. And but thank you very much, sir, for your comments.
Thank you for your time.
We have a Jen, I believe, or did Jen already speak?
No, it's Jen Kuhn. I'm at 20 Carrie Litchfield Lane. I had a question. It's very hard to picture what is going to be put on this lot with the setbacks without any drawings or plans being available online to view. So I would ask the board to hold off on approving this project and let the neighbors and myself actually review the plans and what the applicant is trying to do.
So, ma'am, I could certainly understand as an abutter your interest in what the home is going to look like. But we've actually had this conversation quite a bit on this board before, and it is at least my position, and it's a somewhat educated position, that abutters nor the board really have a say in what the home is to look like. We can say where the footprint should be. We can regulate height under the code, its location, its setbacks, its density, and its use. But its appearance is not something that we have the power to regulate. And because of that, when an applicant doesn't provide us architectural or any other depictions and just provides us the information that we need, we're really unable to require that they do prior to deciding whether or not to grant or not grant their application on the merits. Sometimes it's because they just—
I understand. I think you've misled. I think you've misunderstood. I'm not looking for the architectural plans. I'm not looking for the doors and the windows. I'm looking for like the plot plan. I want to see where the house is going to be positioned. I want to see where the driveway is going to be. Is there going to be front stairs on the front? I want to see all of those setbacks on a plan available online, accessible, without going into town hall.
Okay, so to respond to that, there is a plot plan that shows the footprint of the proposed home that was submitted with the application. The board all has it here. Unfortunately, we do not have the resources or system in place to make that fully available online. We could certainly talk about how easy that might be, or that we should. The fact of the matter is that we don't. Obviously, the pandemic has created some complications there, and folks getting in, we are sensitive to that. Our building office has done a great job of trying to go out of their way whenever someone emails in or calls in to do whatever we can. Sometimes these files are too large or the plans are too large. We're doing the best we can, trying to make everything available that we can. But
thank you. The planning board seems to have everything online. all of the backup material is online. And when a project is presented for approval, normally there's a presentation where you can actually see online right now through the Zoom, the drawings, the plot plan, where the how can anybody comment on this if they haven't seen what they're planning on doing?
Certainly. So to contrast with the planning board, there's one explanation for that is they may be doing it better than we are, and that's certainly something I'll look into. The other
Well, I think with the comments of this project.
Ma'am, I got a little button. Please don't make me use it. I'm going to be able to speak before you're finished. The other explanation with that is they typically deal with commercial developments quite often more than we do, which are understandably somewhat more advanced in the technology involved in their application. Sometimes their applications have a lot longer lead time. So there are some reasonable explanations for why we don't have all of that electronic information available.
Is it possible for the applicant to present it now on the Zoom?
Paul, do you have that capability at this moment?
No,
Share.
I don't have the ability to share the drawing on the screen.
Well, I'd like you to please hold off on approving this until we can see what the plans are, the plot plans and the setbacks on the actual site.
I certainly understand your request. I appreciate it. We're certainly going to look into continuing to advance in making plans available on the screen, especially if this continues. But at this time, especially where we're putting a house back where it always was, and where I think at least for the other members of the public that had some questions, we were able to adequately explain the setbacks. I'm not so inclined to entertain delaying a decision on this application. I obviously can't speak for my fellow board members.
Well, I don't think that's acceptable to the residents, the public. I don't think it's acceptable to not being able to see what they're actually planning, the space and how they're going to lay that house out and approve that without having several people commented. And I think you should hold off and wait. It's a pretty prime location.
Your objection is certainly noted. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to comment, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
The zoning and planning board are two completely different things. Zoning applies our zoning regulations to applications. We are asked in a zoning board of appeals hearing to simply consider whether relief may be granted to specific aspects of the zoning bylaw. This is not a board that is discussing the aesthetics of an application. This particular application is one that has been before the board within the last 10 years, 11 years. It's an application that is maintaining the three sides setbacks within the confines of the zoning. The regulations allow for it. We're not looking for any relief on either of the front yard setbacks on Michael or 11th or the side yard setback. The applicant can't do anything about the size of the lot. There's clearly been a structure on this property in the past. The board is not looking to, we're very happy to hear public comment and how an application may impact the general public or the character of the neighborhood or whether it is substantially detrimental to the neighborhood. But in terms of whether or not the stairs are in the right spot or whatever, unless we're talking about a violation of a right of way or it isn't really applicable. So as much as the member of the public's concern is well-founded, and I appreciate it, I don't think that in this particular application, greater information disclosure than what has been made available substantially changes our ability to make a decision on behalf of the applicant.
Thank you, Ed. With that, I see Jen, and I apologize, I don't see your last name. I didn't write it down. We will come back to you. Mr. Hamaker, I believe you have a hand raised. See if we can unmute.
Hi there.
Hi
Can you
there.
hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. You just bear with me here.
Please.
Start off the issue here regarding Mr. Mirabito's thing about the DEP or plan submitted in 2009 or whatever. The problem is he didn't tell you is that I appealed those plans. And as a result, after 2 years, the plans never had a final decision, and it ended up the property was sold to Steve Grable, who had his own set of plans. And from then on, the house was built under his ownership. So whatever plans were in 2009 that he submitted, like I said, the approval and stuff, it went through all the paces. The end result is it's expired. It should have nothing to do with what is done to this property. Also regarding the setbacks, the previous owner, two previous owners, the address or frontage has always been on number 43 Oceanside Drive, which would make, and again, I know it's a 3-corner lot. I know that the yards and all that kind of stuff are up for discussion, but the bottom line is that prior to Mr. Boyajian purchasing the property, the two previous owners, the front door or frontage was on 43 Oceanside Drive. Their backyard was what abuts my property on Marion Road. Number 3, regarding the usage, like I said, I was in there earlier to give you all kinds of paperwork. I thought you guys were going to be in the town hall, and we had to zoom in to talk to you guys. I didn't realize you were all going to be at your own homes. I would have tried to get my package together and stuff. But the problem is that I know you have problems with what you can decide on and what you can't decide on. The biggest issue is you can decide upon the usage. And Mr. Mirabito here in his application, he's telling us that even though the property is 43 Oceanside Drive, he wants to use 11th Avenue as the front of the house, which would then make my property line a side lot as opposed to a backyard, which would change the setback requirements for whatever we got. And again, I don't know what the issue is, whether you can or cannot address that. All I can say is that for up until Mr. Boyajian transferred the house down the street, it's always been the front of the house is 43 Oceanside Drive. The back of the house is the property. The sides were Marion Road and 11th. Now, in addition, you have it before you, again, in my package, there was order of conditions set by the Conservation Committee. In that order of condition, Mr. Mirabito submitted a plot plan or a plan that the Conservation Commission acted on. And if you had that, and I couldn't, I don't have it with me, I didn't bring it. It shows the fact that there's no setbacks on that plan submitted to the Conservation Committee. The diagrams are all there, the streets are all there, the borders are all there, but the actual setbacks are not identified on that plan to the Conservation Committee. In addition to that, like a neighbor up the street said to you, it's obvious that what's happening in this area that, and even again, there's a website that Mr. Boyajian has somebody advertise on, that even up until just prior to the house being moved, and the date of that was March 13th last year, he was renting out these properties. And he advertised on a website, and again, in that package that I have given you, the website Mr. Boyajian has control of or belongs to, or whatever does adjust his properties, shows you that he's renting out these places and they got 10 bedrooms. Now, the house known as 43 Oceanside Drive was also known as the Boyajian house under these rentals. That's the house that went down the street to number 33 Oceanside Drive. Now, when he bought it, according to the town plan or whatever, it was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. Now he's moved it down the street to 33 Oceanside Drive. The front of the house is on Oceanside Drive. The backyard is property behind him. And it's the same front door that was on the house when it was on 43 Oceanside Drive. But now that house is listed on the property rentals as 5 or 6 bedrooms and 3 baths. Now, I know he was able to add to that and all that kind of stuff. I don't know the particulars. I never saw the plan. I can't, again, that's come and gone. But what's still here is they're trying to project the information that what the plan is before you, all right, is almost exactly like the plans were previous. And I don't believe that's true. Mr. Grable, when he put the house up, his side yard or backyard was at 20 feet or more, as opposed to what they want to put up now, the house itself coming to 10 feet. And the front of the house, again, was 43 Oceanside Drive. The setbacks, I don't argue with the setbacks as measured from Marion Road or from 11th Ave. I do argue the fact that what he wants to put up is not in the exact footprint as the property built there the 2 previous times. The original house that went up,
Sure.
and or the house that
I'm
was
sorry.
made. Hello,
I do want to clarify what.
hello,
Hi there, Mr. Hammercraft. I do want to clarify what you.
you're all breaking up.
Okay,
I can hear you now.
we can hear you. I do want to clarify what you're saying there. Where are you concerned that there is a noticeable difference in the footprint of the home?
The footprint I'm considering is the fact that when Grable owned the property and Boyajian bought it from him in 2015, the so-called, again, just bear with me, the front door was on Oceanside Drive, which made the property adjacent to me the backyard, which is
So-
either 20 foot or
Point of
30.
clarification there, sir.
Yeah.
Where the home is entered or where the driveway is, Bob, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that doesn't actually have any bearing on where a rear or side setback would apply. The logistics of the lot and the location of the streets have a bearing on that factor, but where the actual driveway or front door is does not.
Okay,
You're correct.
all right. Well, I'm just saying that the footprint that existed under the original ownership of the house and when Mr. Grable bought the house, as opposed to when Mr. Boyajian wants to buy the house and move it, it's a difference of almost 10 to 15 feet on the side yard.
And where exactly is that, sir? Because that information would be pertinent to our decision.
Okay, well, in your his application, under this here, isn't there a plot plan that he submitted for tonight's hearing?
Certainly.
Can you see me?
We cannot, sir.
Okay, hang on 1 second.
I guess.
And Mark, we did just ask you to start your video. There you go.
Okay, this is all, again, I was on my phone. You guys couldn't get me, whatever. Can you see me now?
Yes, certainly.
Okay. You have with you a plot plan submitted by Mr. Boyajian's people.
Yes, sir.
Okay. If you look at that, it's going to show that the actual building structure itself is 10 feet from my property line.
Yes.
Okay. That's almost a 20-foot difference than what existed there before.
You're saying that the prior home was 30 feet from your property line?
Yes.
Sir, I've reviewed the prior decision, and what I can tell you is that that is not consistent with I'm trying to remember the date, but that is not consistent with the prior permitting.
I'm going by the actual house built on the property by Steve Grable.
Okay, I'm not familiar with the actual house. I am familiar with I believe it was a very late 2009 decision on this property. And I
Okay, and
don't
that's
have
what
the distance it was from your property that was permitted, but it was certainly not 30 feet.
Okay, and that's what I'm contesting. That property or approval on that has lapsed because of the fact that Mr. Boyajian never came into ownership of this property to act on. Those plans that he submitted to you for 43 Oceanside Drive, last known or also known as 97 Marion Road, were not, initially they may have been approved, but they never made it up to the town hall to go further because I appealed to the DEP, and after 2 years, I said it was a moot point. The whole thing expired because Steve Grable came in and purchased the property in 2000 and I believe 13 or less, or 12. And he went and got his own site plan that came after what Mr. Boyajian had applied for. And he built his own house on that property with those setbacks as the front yard, backyard, 2 side yards.
Yeah.
And when Mr. Boyajian applied for his permit to remove the house, I believe he submitted a plot plan that shows those dimensions to be much more than 10 feet setback that he's looking for now.
I'm not familiar with that, sir. What I can tell you is the code only requires a home on this property, on this lot, to be 8 feet from your property line.
Based upon
more than 8 feet from the property line, it complies with our code with respect to a setback from your property line.
And that may be so, but again, the information you're being told is that this building to be purchased or to be set up and built is in the exact footprint as the previous properties or houses were.
Well,
and that's what I'm telling you. That's not true.
I do understand that you disagree with that contention. What I can assure you is that this board is relying, with respect to the setback from your property line, this board, the analysis really starts and stops with that 8-foot required setback with respect to your property line, and are making sure that this home is further than or right up to 8 feet and not closer. And there is no question that what we are approving, if we so approve tonight, will be a 10.2 foot setback from your property line. That's what's being proposed here. And I think I understand you're disagreeing with what was done prior or not, but with respect to the setback from your property line, it really doesn't matter, because we're looking at an application that proposes a conforming setback from your property line.
And I accept that as your decision, but the fact is that what I'm, again, bringing up for you is that you're being told it's the exact same footprint as the existing 2 properties. And that is not the case.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Please.
I believe that the applicant has presented that the property is essentially in the same footprint. I've reviewed the finding from December of 2009. At that time, it was indicated that the setback from 95 Marion Road was 17.6 feet. It's irrelevant because 8 feet is the required setback. The front yard setback from Oceanside Drive at that time was 7.6. They're proposing an 8 plus setback, so it's less than the setback of the property at the time, the pre-existing structure that was once on the lot. And the sideline setbacks are both conforming. The front yard setbacks from 11th and Marion are both conforming. So as much as it's an interesting conversation, I think it's moot in this particular application.
Okay.
And I would agree. Generally, when we ask a question like Ed and I did of Paul here, I think we both expect someone like Paul's answer to be with respect to, and I wouldn't have expected Paul to comment on something that was different, but entirely within the building envelope.
Hello? You there?
We're here.
Okay. And again, so let's go back and address the information you're basing your stuff on in 2009. So is that, since that was never acted upon and time has expired?
Yes,
isn't
yes,
that
sir.
moot?
No, that is a document that's been filed with the town clerk. It's a decision of the board. It was based on evidence presented before the board. That document can be relied upon as being factual, and the engineer's plan with this application can be relied on to be accurate. And the presentation before us is to build a structure with conforming side yard, front yard on 11th and Marion, and a non-conforming front yard on Oceanside that is less non-conforming than the prior structure as evidenced by the finding of the ZBA in 2009.
Okay. And let's go back and address what's happened as far as usage goes. for
Usage
property.
is not before the board. We are not in a position to make a decision about usage. There is no bylaw, nor is there a state law requiring questioning usage. This is being presented to us as a single-family home, as long as it is used as a single-family home. And single-family homes can be used in a variety of ways under the bylaws in the town and under state law. It is reasonable and allowed under our bylaws that a single-family home can be used as a residence for boarders. It is reasonable and allowed that a single-family home can be used for many things other than a traditional husband and wife and 3.2 children. This is not a point before the board, whether it's used as an Airbnb or a VIBO or whatever. Those are aspects that can be brought up at town meeting. A article can be presented at town meeting to evaluate whether or not that's an appropriate use of single-family homes in the town or needs to be regulated, but it's not before the board tonight.
Okay, but what is before the board is what you guys can act upon, the detrimental response to how that property is going to affect the neighborhood,
A
correct?
single-family home in a single-family neighborhood is a single-family home.
Okay. Well, getting back to the Airbnb stuff like that, the town of Scituate,
Before the board.
the town of
Yeah.
Scituate has
Mr. Havergrove, I'm sorry to cut you off. I am, but I really don't know how else we can say it. For the purposes of this board, Airbnb rentals are allowed, and we just don't have the power to judge an application negatively due to their usage. You have placed yourself on mute, sir. I'll allow you to unmute. We're going to give you one more minute if you have something different to ask, but then I do need to move on.
Mark, you're going to take your mouse, you're going to move it to that left-hand corner. You're going to unmute yourself for 60 seconds. Mark, take your mouse, go to the left-hand corner of your Zoom screen. You see that?
Okay, we got it?
Yes, 60
Okay.
seconds.
All right, 60 seconds is this, and I'll wrap it up. Town of Scituate has adopted a policy from town meeting 2019 regarding rental property that does not conform with hotel, motel, lodging, B&Bs. The state has a law that the town of Scituate adopted through the town meeting and went into effect on July 1st, 2019. It addresses the fact that all property rented temporarily or whatever, okay, must pay the tax. So in the town of Scituate, there is a policy adapted from the state law that mandates people who rent this property out short-term, and it's all specified in it, that they have to pay the tax.
Sir, this is really going to be our last question with you in this round, but are you alleging that we should consider denying this application because the applicant may or may not be paying his taxes properly?
No, I'm asking to deny it because it's going to be detrimental to the neighborhood because the 4 previous properties that he's come across, he's renting them, okay, and they are been definitely detrimental to our neighborhood. This will now be his 5th property.
Thank you.
Okay, and his
Mr.
fifth
Hammond.
property that he's allowed to do it.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. I hope we answered some of them. We are going to need to move on. Just to reiterate one last time, under the code of Scituate and the law and powers that are available to this board, short-term rentals are not an activity that we even have the power to view as detrimental to a neighborhood. Short-term rentals of single-family homes, I should be clear. If this home is used as a single-family home, it's used as a single-family home.
I'd like to suggest, Chairman, that the evidence that Mr. Hamacher just brought to the board suggests that the town meeting adopted the imposing of taxes on the short-term rental of single-family homes. To me, that de facto allows the use of short-term rentals of single-family homes.
Yeah, that's a valid point. I don't know, sometimes we can get a little loose with our regurgitation of what did and didn't happen at town meeting. I like to be careful there. So we could just leave that to the records that are kept at town meeting, but you do make a valid point, Ed. Miss Kuhn, I believe you have something else to add as
Yes, I would,
see if there's anyone
again, I would
else.
just,
There isn't.
Mr. Boucher, you are breaking up a little bit. Your vice chair would be.
I'll take on the role. And
Yeah, we don't have one.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
I nominate Ed.
One of you can, that would be fantastic.
if you'd like to go ahead and speak.
No, go ahead.
That's okay. It looks like
I suggest one of you you take over real quick.
Ms. Kuhn, if you'd like to go ahead and speak.
yes, Jennifer Kuhn, 20 Carrie Litchfield Lane. I just asked that, are the site plans, are they stamped by a registered architect or a surveyor?
Yes, they are.
Okay, and so your decision will be based on those plans in front of you today?
Yes, they will. The decision will cite those plans as part of our decision.
Okay, and they're available at the building department?
Yes.
Okay. I still think that you should wait until people have the time to approve those online with the conditions of COVID. I think that you should definitely wait and make that available. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in the public? Anthony, you seem to be back to being no longer pixelated, so.
I'm back. Ed, thank you. I think we've gotten through our public comments on this application. Do we have a motion?
I make a motion on the application of Alfred Bjorlin, 94 Marion Road, Scituate, Mass, for his request for a special permit finding in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 48, Section 6, Section 950.3 of the Scituate bylaw, to allow for the construction of a single-family dwelling at 43 Oceanside Drive, Scituate, Mass. 02066, in that the proposed construction pursuant to the plans prepared by Paul Mirabito of Ross Engineering, which are dated January 15th, 2021, that if constructed pursuant to the plans, will not create any new nonconformities or intensify any existing nonconformities, and to the extent that they do, it's not more detrimental to the neighborhood.
Second.
All those in favor, Bucieri, aye.
Tibbetts, aye.
Kavanaugh, aye.
Seeks, aye.
Harrison, aye.
The ayes have it. Thank you. Would counsel for the applicant be able to prepare that decision?
I read his lips. He said absolutely.
Fantastic.
There we go. There we go. Yes, I will prepare the decision for the board. A draft decision.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that.
All right.
Mr. Arrow has
Thank you.
experience with the board, so I'm sure his draft will be elegantly prepared.
Thank you, Ed.
I served with Steve years ago on the board and I've really appreciated his expertise here.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. With that, I see we have Attorney DeLisi present, and we are going to move on to what was publicized as our fourth application. Obviously, it's our fifth of the evening. The application of Scituate Harbor Development LLC, Stephen C. Warner and Robert H. Warner of 146 Front Street in Scituate, requesting a special permit finding pursuant to Scituate zoning bylaw, section 820, and/or any other relief which the Board of Appeals may grant to change the pre-existing non-conforming theater use and adjacent retail and other space of the interior of the building at 1 Mill Wharf Plaza to 4 condominium units containing a total of 7 bedrooms, and to combine approximately 900 square feet of such theater use into retail space, which is a specified use not substantially different in character and not substantially more detrimental or injurious to the neighborhood than the existing non-conforming use. And 2, a finding and or any other relief which the Board of Appeals may grant that the parking demand created by such change in use is substantially reduced and is exempted from or does not constitute an intensification of parking requirements under zoning bylaw section 760.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeff DeLisi, with the law firm Orenberger, DeLisi and Harris. I'm here tonight with Bob Warner, who is, together with his brothers, are the owners of Scituate Harbor Development, which is the entity that owns this property. Many of you may know the Warners. Bob is the proprietor of Mill Wharf Restaurant and has been a fixture in the town for decades. Also tonight with us is Jean Herman. I believe she's with us. I didn't see her on the list, but Jean is our architect from the firm of Carr, Lynch and Sandell. So you all are familiar with this property, 1 Mill Wharf Plaza. It's a mixed-use building which contains movie theater and shops on the first floor and residential dwelling units on the 2 floors above that. COVID and the pandemic have caused an untenable situation as concerns the movie industry and specifically as concerns this theater. It's apparent that the theater, at least apparent to our clients, is no longer viable and that the future of the theater industry is uncertain. And therefore the future of that business within this building is also uncertain. I've asked Bob, and he's going to explain to you the current situation involving the theater and the efforts by the Warners that they've made to keep the theater afloat. And none of us, myself especially, take pride in informing the board that we've determined that it's necessary to repurpose the theater. The concept that we're presenting to the board would be to convert a portion of the space, about 900 square feet, to retail uses, and then also to convert the remainder of the space to residential apartments or units. With respect to retail, we're taking essentially the area from the theater's bathrooms and the lobby within the theater space itself presently, and we're going to reconfigure that particular area to be either combined with known as ice cream shop or to allow additional commercial tenants and vendors. With respect to the remainder of the theater, the screening rooms and the like, we would be converting that space into residential uses, specifically for number 4, the number 4 units having a total of 7 bedrooms is what is being proposed to you in this application. So this particular property is located in the Harbor Business Zone. Residential uses, including multifamily residential uses, are allowed as of right in this zone under your bylaw. Also allowed as of right under your bylaw are many commercial uses, including offices, restaurants, and retail businesses. What is not allowed as of right in this particular zone is a theater use, if you can believe it. In 2001, prior to the permit that authorized the construction of the building that's there now, the uses of the property were mostly non-conforming, and they included a lumber sales and storage facility, a marine storage facility. There was a residential component, a retail component. And at the time, there was the movie theater that pre-existed the one that's here now, which at the time was 679 seat, 4-screen movie theater. The special permit that authorized the existing use proposed to eliminate all of the non-conforming lumber, marine storage uses, and it specifically allowed the significant reduction in the then existing non-conforming theater use by allowing the Warners to eliminate 2 of the 4 theater screens and to reduce the capacity of that theater from 679 seats down to 218 seats. The board's decision in 2001, amongst others, noted the positive impact that a reduction in parking requirements would have on the harbor business area. And with respect to this application, I thought that it is interesting or to note to the board that the 2001 zoning bylaw has actually been amended in the provision, within the provision that we're coming to the board today in. Essentially, the amendment changed the mechanism of the approval process, whereas in 2001, the approval process for a change in a pre-existing non-conforming use was a special permit. It has been amended to lessen the requirement of a special permit by only requiring the board to make a finding as is being requested tonight. And essentially what that means is the difference between a unanimous vote of 3 of 3 members of the board in a special permit context versus a 2 out of 3 vote in a finding context. What's interesting also is that Section 820 of your bylaw, which is the area of the bylaw that we are coming under, authorizes the board to allow by a finding a change, extension, or alteration in a pre-existing non-conforming use to another non-conforming use. And as I was preparing this application, it occurred to me that there's a question, an interesting question, as to whether zoning relief in this context is even required, or whether we can do this project as of right. And that's because what we are proposing to do is to eliminate entirely the sole remaining non-conforming use and to replace it with conforming uses. Since this property, however, is a significant piece of property to the town of Scituate, it's the hub of the harbor, and also because the existing building was allowed by a special permit as belt and suspenders, we decided to seek a finding from the ZBA that the proposed use is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing use. With respect to parking, your bylaw, section 760.2 of the zoning bylaw, provides that land uses in existence on January 1st, 1988 are not subject to parking requirements, provided that the change in use does not enlarge or increase the parking needs. In this particular circumstance, there is no question that the uses which we are seeking a finding to alter were in existence well prior to 1988, and even actually well prior to the adoption of zoning in Scituate. Nonetheless, it's obvious that the elimination of the theater use will significantly reduce the required parking associated with the building if it were not exempt. And that is because under your regulations, a theater use requires 1 space per every 3 seats. The 218 seat theater would therefore require 73 parking spaces to accommodate that use. The new proposal to add 900 square feet of retail space and 7 bedrooms only requires 12 spaces under your bylaw if the property is not exempt. So our calculation is that the parking demand as a result of the proposal before you today would actually decrease the parking requirement from 73 spaces to 12 spaces, and that would be a net reduction in parking demand of about 61 spaces under my calcs. Scituate Harbor Condominium does not have a site that could accommodate off-street parking. That's not different than most businesses in the harbor. However, I provided the board with documentation that indicates that we have acquired an easement to utilize an area adjacent to this property behind the Welch Company building. And that area also extends behind the Scituate Harbor condo buildings and the canopied parking area between the 2 buildings. And that easement will provide us with at least 20, with the use of at least 20 parking spaces, which well exceeds the 12 space requirement for these uses should a requirement actually exist. In doing my research on the issue of parking, I found that there actually is an analogous situation. Our request of relief seeks a finding also under 820, but also an explicit finding that the parking demand created by the change in use is substantially reduced and therefore exempt and does not constitute an intensification of parking requirements under section 760. This additional finding that we've requested is essentially tantamount to a finding that the site plan review is not required for this proposal, in my estimation. So recently I sent correspondence to the board that contained a copy of a prior zoning decision that I indicated would be analogous. And that is the circumstance in 2009 on the application of the Hamilton Company, which either managed or was the then owner of the Welch Company building. And at the time, what the Hamilton Company was seeking approval under the same section 820, to change pre-existing non-conforming use within the building. It was specifically, I think, also contemplating the use of Oro Restaurant. And that particular zoning request at the time also sought the same relief with respect to parking, which I've requested tonight. The concept in that circumstance being that if the board did not find that the parking requirements were not applicable, then the site plan review would be required, but actually would be required if the parking requirements were not applicable. And so in that circumstance, the board concluded and found that the parking requirements were inapplicable as the uses predated 1988, and therefore site plan review was not required in that circumstance. And this situation is no different. So before I hand this over to Bob, I wanted to just make a few extra points and clarify a few, at least a misconception at the very least, which I noticed on the Scituate Monthly Facebook page. Our business plan is to keep known as ice cream. There's no plan to remove the ice cream shop or the existing jewelers. And we look forward to working with those tenants to make better spaces for them. We do not propose any significant changes to the exterior of the building. The foundation of the building is actually the brick facade area, which is below the elevated walkway at the top of the steps that lead to the theater. We're aware that the board has received correspondence from Scituate Harbor Condominium Association with a number of items and issues that they were concerned about. And we're pleased to announce that we've met with the board's representatives since they sent that correspondence. And those representatives informed us today that they are not opposed to the project. And as a result of that conversation today, we'll be collaborating with them as the project moves on to ensure as minimal disruption as possible. Finally, we're aware that the board received correspondence from the planning board citing concerns about the desire to avoid vacancies in the harbor and to encourage vitality, as well as also raising some questions concerning parking and aesthetics. We believe that this plan allows the continuation of retail uses at the first floor of this property, and that it also creates necessary housing in the harbor, which is something that the state has recently, in Governor Baker's economic relief bill related to COVID, has encouraged towns to encourage, and is also a necessary ingredient, I think, to adding patrons to existing businesses, because by bringing persons into the harbor, we're bringing shoppers into the harbor. So as demonstrated in my previous comments, we believe we meet the parking issues, and this is the best project that we can put forward at this time. And therefore, I think I'll turn it over to Bob and to explain what efforts the Warners have gone through concerning the theater itself. So Bob, if you want to come over, I'm going to let him sit in my seat for a minute.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, I'm Bob Warner, and a lot of you know me from being at the Mill Wharf for the last 37 years. My family has owned the Welch Company since 1981. Property, we don't own all the property that we originally did. We had to sell out some of it, but we still have retail and commercial space there. We own, as Jeff said, the movie theater. The movie theater, I would have to say, has had problems pre-COVID. And a lot of you probably realize that streaming services like Netflix and Disney have decided not to release films directly to movie houses, and it has affected the movie business. Brett Hardy, who was our most recent tenant at the movie house, was pretty much able to stay there as long as he could because he had a full-time job other than running the theater. We previous to having Brett being there for a number of years, had Patriot Cinemas. Patriot Cinemas left because they basically said they could not make it in Scituate Harbor. It was a difficult place. As I've found out, as we all who do business in the harbor, you know, for 5, 6, 7 months of the year, it's a very difficult place to do business. We all seem to thrive and do fairly well in the summer months. But as a result, we've also been in the business of renting spaces, retail spaces, office spaces for the past 40 years. And during that 40-year period, we've had a difficult time. Many, many years we've had spaces that have just been empty. And what we tried to do as a family is get together to say, what can we do? As Jeff already mentioned, there's a need for housing at this present time. And we thought it would be a good use for that area. We really also didn't think that COVID would last as long as it did. It was something we thought that after the summer, you know, possibly the movie house would open up again. They were limited to a 25% capacity with no concessions. So it became a difficult thing, and they understandably had to leave. And we're sorry for that, but I'm myself very concerned of what's going to happen with the whole movie industry, the theater industry, as everyone, including myself, has large screen TVs with surround sound at home, and I can stream movies, and there's not that, I wouldn't say desire, but there's not that need for us to go to the movie houses anymore. So at the present time, we've been in touch with, as Jeff said, our architects, and thought that this would be a good use of the space. And we're hoping that you feel the same. I plan to continue to run the Mill Wharf. I want to do business in the town. We want to be good neighbors. We want to be able to have all the people that I have some very, very good customers who live in the condo buildings. I want to continue those relationships, and hopefully this will be a good use. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
So I think what I'll do is I'll defer over to the board as to how, whether I can answer any questions. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interest in this. So fire away.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm gonna let my fellow board members ask any questions they have. I did, as you mentioned, we did receive a letter, which is part of the record, from the planning board that raised some concerns. I also received a call from their chair to discuss this, which I notified you of, and they did have some specific concerns and points that they raised that I would like to address, and I'm especially conscious of that because the planning board is unable to be here because they are at their own meeting at this time. And that's just some unfortunate scheduling. So I would like to reiterate for the record some of their concerns once this board has had the opportunity to have some of their questions answered. So if Ed, Tom, Susan, George, if you please go ahead if you guys have any questions.
Susan, do you have? I have a couple.
I have a couple as well. You can start, George, if you want.
All right. So why condominiums versus just converting the retail space?
Well, I tried to address that in my remarks. It's a question, first off, with COVID, adding more retail space isn't necessarily an assurance that we're going to have tenants. So we tried to kind of maintain a balance of a mixture of a modest amount of residential and retail. Additionally, we think that there's a benefit to the harbor by bringing more residents into the harbor, which brings more patrons in for businesses. And as I indicated, the state is very interested in making sure that Scituate, it actually identified Scituate specifically as one of the communities it was targeting to build housing.
Yeah, okay. So I understand your point. We're talking, if I recall correctly, 2, 4, 6, 7 bedrooms?
Yeah, 7 bedrooms.
7 bedrooms, right, is what you would be adding. So call it 10, 12 people to Scituate Harbor, right? You would be attracting approximately 12 residents to Scituate Harbor, where arguably some type of retail establishment or a series of retail establishments would increase the foot traffic to downtown Scituate significantly more than the 12 people that would live there. Who would be living there would be probably working somewhere else and may or may not be shopping in the supermarket in the harbor. So that's sort of one point of that. I think when the state says it wants to increase housing, it doesn't necessarily mean condos. It tends to refer to things like rental housing, but we can leave that for another issue, for another day. as far as the parking concerns go, your point was fundamentally, right, to simplify it, because we are reducing the way I understood it, because we're reducing the business traffic and we only need parking for arguably residents, there's not going to be an increase in parking demand, right? If I understood the framework of the argument, which may be true, may not be true. I'm not going to dispute that. I could see a scenario, however, where transient parking for retail is very different than arguably permanent parking for people that live there and need to leave their cars overnight. So maybe it is, maybe it isn't, toss up for me. So that was sort of my second comment, really, versus the question. And then the planning board's approach, and I think Anthony may want to comment on this further, but their view of this is that this is fundamentally a mixed use situation, which has certain requirements, fundamental requirements associated with it, specifically requirements regarding the commercial use of the space. How do you respond sort of to that?
Well, I would think that is true if you're creating a mixed-use building from the ground up with mixed uses which didn't previously exist. And because we have a mixture of uses, and in particular because we have a non-conforming use, therefore it gives the board the jurisdiction to entertain this request.
Great, I'm good for now.
Jeff, just a couple questions. So right now, in 1 Mill Wharf, in 3 Mill Wharf, how many, that makes up the condo, association, correct? Essentially.
The condo association is comprised of the mixture of businesses and residences in those two buildings. And is there a third building, Bob?
132 Front Street is all resident and office.
Yeah, so there's the building of 132 Front Street,
Yep.
which is right on Front Street.
Is part of it.
Is part of it.
So those are the three that are encompassed in the master deed and the whole condominium, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
So how many, I'm trying to find out how many parking spots are designated for those three buildings, which from a residential standpoint.
From a residential standpoint, I believe it's 2 more parking spaces than the number of bedrooms within those buildings. And I think I came across it today. I'd be able to answer that question more succinctly in a second here. It's actually stated in your permit from 2001. That's where I saw it today, which on the last page, the third from the last paragraph, I believe, hold on.
189.
30 parking spaces dedicated to 28 condominium units.
Okay. And are those?
Excuse me, did I say 38? I meant to say 30.
30. Yep, I see that.
Yep.
And those are those the spaces that are on the, what I'll call the interior courtyard of, like, say, between building 1 and 3?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So
there's kind of a covered
yep.
carport, if you would.
Okay. And then the remainder of the parking is using that, what's called that easement plan, right?
The remainder of the parking presently is using probably a hybrid of the easement and Cole Parkway.
Right.
And I might add, you know how behind Nona's kind of running along the length
Yeah.
of the harbor.
Where the charter boats are.
Those are parallel parking spaces that I didn't see on the condominium site plans. So they were added to the site. And a portion of those spaces are actually within the easement area that I had previously alluded to.
Okay. So one of my concerns is this easement plan that shows this parking. I don't think, I'm pretty sure at the time it was drawn in 2007, that's how it looked. But I don't think that's how the parking configuration is today.
I think you're correct. And I don't know exactly how many spaces are presently out there today. The plan that you have in front of you was the approved plan with the condominiums to set when it phased in, the units. Anthony, you're raising your hand?
I actually counted, because I get to do this incredibly fun exercise from time to time in my day job, performing zoning analysis. And the plan, Tom, you make a good point. It's not laid out on the ground now the way it is in the plan. There's actually, I have the numbers somewhere in my notes. There's 60 something spaces in the old layout in the main area if you take away the area over by the restaurant. And there's actually about 68 spaces the way it's presently laid out. There is more parking available presently, just a tiny bit more than on that plan as it was laid out in, I think, 2007.
Right. But I think what I'm trying to get is that easement plan, those are the only spots that overnight residents are permitted to park in, right?
Those are the only spaces that are available legally at this juncture as a result of the fact that the Welch Company building is now in a new ownership, has been purchased by another entity. Those are the only spaces that legally would be available for residents. And of course, Cole Parkway is public.
Right. So I guess my problem is that where that easement plan has changed, we don't know how many are actually, besides the 30 spaces that essentially would probably be deeded. And I think currently between the two plazas, there's about 51 units. I don't know, am I right?
I don't know the answer to that, but I will tell you that the easement, if you look carefully at the easement
54.
document, I don't know.
Yeah, no, Anthony just,
I think
he wrote,
the units presently in the condo, I believe, is 54 based on a master deed and amendments.
Yep.
I was just going to point out that the easement document that was provided to the board designates not parking spaces, but an easement area within which is available for parking. So it didn't specify, a certain number of parking spaces. And when I prepared my letter to the board, I pulled out the plan. I didn't go physically and count. I pulled out the plan that's at the Registry of Deeds, which was the as-built plan back then in 2006 or 7, whenever it was put on.
So let me clarify what I said. 54 is the number of bedrooms previously existing in the condominium. I believe it's 28 units under the master deed.
Okay.
And so with the 30 spaces that are designated and obviously reserved and set away, we had 21 spaces drawn on the old easement plan, which arguably, even if the layout of the parking changes, because that plan was attached to the easement that was granted, they would still have a right to 21 spaces in that lot, however that lot might be laid out. And then to Jeff's point, additional spaces which aren't shown on the 2007 easement plan have been put in place along those charter boats like you mentioned, which I myself have parked there when I've been enjoying some ice cream, and they almost seem like they're an extension of Cole Parkway, when in reality this plan shows us that's technically private property, and I was parking in what is essentially a private easement.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, I think most people, there's a lot of signage down there. Parking's obviously an issue. I think that most people probably haven't thought much about it, but there's probably a misconception as to where Cole Parkway begins and whether there's even private property there and whether that's actually Cole Parkway. Basically, from the corner of the building where Nona's is in, all the way out towards the Mill Wharf is all private property.
Right. Okay. I'm good for now.
Susan, anything?
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. My questions were regarding the parking, and I think you've effectively gone through it. The spaces, so in front of Nona's, that's basically the place where you don't want to put your car at high tide, right? All those spaces? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, depending on how much, you might not want to put your car anywhere near Nona's at height.
Yeah, the whole harbor.
Okay, so it's those spaces and then Cole Parkway as well would be the people's options to park?
The legal option would be the spaces within the easement area and then the public domain.
So,
Okay.
Susan, I think to your question though, if, and this is obviously not the most technologically advanced process, this being that strip along the water, which you were calling in front of Nona's, if the front is towards the harbor.
Toward the
So
harbor,
those
right.
spaces there that are parallel spaces are part of their easement. And then there's an additional 21 spaces on the easement plan, which actually are, the condo has rights in, which are traditionally were spaces being used by Be Well customers and the dog and toy store customers. When in actuality, this easement does give rights in that parking to the condo.
And the theater customers as well.
Well, that is a very good point, Attorney Dooley.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, since parking seems to be so much fun, the easement parking that we're talking about is not designated. The parking under the canopies between the two buildings is designated by unit. Is that correct?
Correct.
So the easement parking is actually easement parking for the residents of the condominium, but we need to appreciate that part of that condominium structure is retail. So it's easement for retail space access. I believe Cole Parkway currently has a restriction for overnight parking.
Does.
So that when we talk about reducing 73 retail spaces assigned to or utilized by the theater and creating 12 overnight parking spaces, we don't really have any place to get them. I mean, arguably the easement space could be made into overnight parking or recognized as overnight parking and designated as such. That might be agreeable to the new tenants of the residential condominiums, but might be disagreeable to the tenants of the retail space, which, as far as I know right now, the parking spaces in the easement area are not assigned to residences, and they are used in a intermittent basis and perhaps overnight by the retail space. Is that a fair assessment?
Yep, it is.
So I think we continue to have a parking issue. I'm going to leave that subject for a moment and just go back to the whole structure here. When the permit was granted in 2001, reminds me that I've been on this board far too long. It was one of the most dramatic hearings I've ever attended. Number one, as my recollection of the hearing was that it was a strong reason why the board found favor in this design was that it was a mixed-use application, and that the Warners at the time proposed to maintain the theater, and that was an anchor component of a vibrant downtown commercial district. I recognize that we can't, if they had been proposing a buggy whip factory, it might no longer be applicable, and we may be in fact thinking of theaters as today's buggy whip factory. However, it was clear that this application anchored on maintaining the theater. At the time, there was a very vocal group of pro keep the theater vote. And I don't remember, Jeff, if you were at the meeting or not, but we had a very impassioned plea by one of the applicants of that, one of the members of that group, Brian Marshall, who then left the center stage and sat by the side, and then proceeded to expire during our ZBA meeting. It's seared in my memory because I felt like his last dying breath was to save the theater. I think he deserves that recollection at this point. I don't think that necessarily means the theater has to be there permanently, but I do think that to turn this theater space into condominiums is significant change from the spirit in which the application was presented at the time, and a significant change from the argument that this whole project was designed to include some anchor retail space. It may not be theater any longer, but it doesn't necessarily suggest that it should become condominiums. I've never been one to want to tell an applicant how to design their structures, but I see it in the application's presentation of the proposed floor plan. The 4 condominiums, I'm just not sure where the windows are going to go. I mean, clearly condominium 4 would have some nice windows onto the parking lot. The condominium 3 would be looking at the side and dining area of Riva's. Condominium 1 would have an alley view and Riva's, and condominium 2, I would be looking at the parking lot, I guess, or the covered parking, and not from the view of most of the condominiums, which is from above the covered parking. So I'm not going to make a value judgment on the quality of the view, but I question whether the space is ideally suited for residential condominiums as much as it is well suited for the commercial use that it was designed for. And I would, I guess as much as I'd like to see the theater remain there, a theater is going to attract a lot more business to a vibrant business community than 12 bedrooms. Or 7 bedrooms. I guess I question whether turning that mixed use, which was clearly the spirit of this special permit when it was granted, into condominiums is the best way to go, or even an appropriate way to go. I would argue that this is not a case of a non-conforming use. It's conforming by special permit, and therefore we're not looking to, I think the argument of going to a less conforming use and a use allowed by right goes in the face of the fact that this whole project was developed as an entity, including a reduced size theater.
Which again seems to be the view of the planning board as well.
All right, well, that's a good segue, George. Before we get into the planning board, I'd like to add just a few of my own thoughts and respond to what some of the fellow members have said. I've mentioned before, I work in commercial real estate in my day job, and I'm a poor excuse for someone to comment on the economic viability of commercial development, even though I work with them quite a bit. But as someone who knows a little bit about commercial development and as someone who is very vested in seeing the most vibrant harbor and Front Street possible, there's a lot of things that I would love to see, but knowing what I know, and when I take a step back, I also want to avoid a worst case scenario in our harbor. And what I see here is approximately 5,000 or 6,000 square feet of what we would love to be retail and hospitality space, but it's not on Front Street. It is blocked by buildings in several areas. It is not suitable for a restaurant with outdoor space. And even if it was, that's probably next on the list of things that are hard to pull off in the next 12 to, God forbid, 72 months compared to a theater. It's not going to command office rents given where it is and given the way it's laid out. And there is some retail in this building now. That retail goes downhill if this theater is boarded up for any extended period of time and is unused. And to be honest, this building, where it is, that it doesn't have direct access on Front Street, we're talking about, and whether or not we have a right to is another conversation, but we're talking about what would be best for the town to have in there. And I think what would be best for the town to have in there is anything other than newspaper on the windows that are there now. And especially when that anything is a use that is allowed as of right under our code. And especially because we're not entirely getting rid of the retail and commercial use in there that we know that works and that has a chance of surviving whatever is left of this pandemic.
Yeah, so if Anthony, if I may jump in, just respond to that for a second, if it's okay. We're not happy that we're in this predicament. We don't want to be here. I personally would want to see the theater remain. I enjoyed it. It's sad that we're here. And if we were to convert that entire space into retail tenants, there's no guarantee that after we do that, we're actually going to have tenants. And so what we're trying to do is have a component of this that guarantees that we could stay afloat. And the only component that we know right now that we're going to be able to have an income from is residential. And so what we're trying to do is maintain a balance. I was not at that hearing, Ed. I wasn't in town in 2001, but I had heard those stories. And, when you look at this, the town has made a choice to designate theater space in the harbor as non-conforming. And in a sense, it was a godsend that it did that way back when, because had it not done that, a significant portion of this building may not have been able to have been reconstructed in the way it was. We're in a different time frame. It doesn't seem long ago, but it's a millennium ago with respect to the industry. And I think you all agree, you understand that you would all love to see the theater remain. And you're imploring, I hear you imploring us to look at some various different options, because everybody has an opinion as to what the harbor should look like. We all own it, you know, this is our spot. This is our love community. My clients have put thought into this, and they've consulted with experts, and this is what they've come up with. Is it ideal? It's not. But does it allow them to continue to stay in business? It does. And so that's what, you know, building a project like this and repurposing the space also has a cost to it. And we're going to have to pay that off. And so it's something that we are not happy we're in this position. We don't want to be viewed as greedy developers who are just trying to make another buck, which is something I have heard out of the mouth of some individuals. But if you own the property, what would you do? That's what I would ask you. The parking is exempt, and the use is non-conforming, and we're proposing to convert that non-conforming use, to eliminate it. It's the town's choice to call it non-conforming. That would be my response to a panoply of comments that were made.
Just to, and I think the board needs to double back to parking, because I think that exempt or not, or a lessening or not, which really goes to whether it's exempt or not, because if it's an increase in demand, I think everyone's in agreement it's not exempt. I think that's going to warrant some more discussion from the board, and obviously to hear from some others. But before we get into that, just to, I mentioned I was going to reiterate some of the planning board's concerns that were expressed in their letter, and then also in the call that I received from their chair. One of the mentions and one of the planning board's point of focus was that first floor units were somehow against the town's master plan, or against the thinking for the harbor. And that may be in a somewhat unofficial sense, but I reviewed the code somewhat extensively. I spoke to our building inspector about it, and Bob, please add something if you would like, but I think we're in agreement. And please, fellow board members, if you have anything to add there. I couldn't find anything that made a first floor unit worse or better, or allowed or not allowed, compared to an above ground or second floor unit in the harbor or really anywhere else. So while the planning board may be taking the position that they prefer units in this area to be above retail at all costs, I don't see that regulation in the code. And that is what I discussed with the planning board, and Bob's nodding his head, and Bob and I had discussed that specific issue previously.
Look, our codes and bylaws are imperfect at best. I think that, you know, I respect the planning board greatly, and the town, and the chairman of the Madam Chairman of the planning board. I'm not aware of a provision in the harbor that says that. The master plan is a concept that is envisioned by the planning board and formulated after many hearings as to what it sees the vision of the town. I'm not aware that that's been updated anytime recently in the recent past. And the bylaws of the town, theoretically, if it were working perfectly and the synergy was right, the bylaws of the town would seek to impose regulations that are consistent with the master plan articulated by the planning board, which are representatives elected as opposed to appointed. And so that's how it would work in the real world. I don't think that there's a regulation. I think they would concede that there's not a regulation as you're discussing, but it's common sense that, of course, the planning board doesn't want retail, doesn't want residential on the first floor, because the concept is to create density and travelers within businesses, but then on the first floor to have places for them to go. So I get it. That's not what we're proposing. And we're trying to balance this issue. It's not a new development. If it were a new development, I think that is different. I'm aware of new developments in Greenbush that at least one new development that is taking advantage of a similar kind of vision that was allowed because the bylaw was enacted to implement that vision. I'm not aware that that's happened here in Scituate Harbor, but their opinion should be respected. I just don't know how to respond to it. This is what we've come up with in order to survive.
Thank you. They obviously also raised the parking, which we've discussed some. I'm sure we're going to discuss more before this application is completed. Another point that they raised in their letter and then again in their phone call was a specific assertion that the proposed change in use will exacerbate vacant business fronts in the harbor. Jeff just raised that he didn't know how to respond to a different assertion. I obviously I want to give a voice to some of the planning board's concerns. I almost don't know how to respond to that other than to say, I just don't agree with it. Obviously, a vibrant business that drew people to the harbor in this space would be potentially better for other businesses in the harbor than for condominium units. Now, another Irish bar in this space might not be better for the Irish bar that's across the street, since they're all competing for customers, but I don't think we disagree. Everyone would like to have a vibrant and successful commercial operation in this space. The question is, I'm of the opinion, at least, that for condominium units, with George, you raised the point, only 12 people, but 12 people who are living in the harbor 24/7, the amount that they spend at Village Market and at Lucky Fin and at Salt Society, that's going to add up. And I can assure you those business owners, and even me as someone who wants to see the harbor hopping, would rather have those 12 people than newspaper on the walls of the theater. So that's something there. And then really what wasn't specifically laid out in the letter, but was mentioned to both Bob and I in a phone call, and I want to mention here again, because especially because the planning board is unable to be here, is that the planning board indicated that, and I wasn't entirely clear on it, and as with everything, I wish we had more time to discuss it with the planning board. They indicated that they were of the opinion, or at least the chair was, that we deny or postpone this application and send the applicant for site plan review. And Bob, is how I just repeated that consistent with the impression that you got from the planning board?
Yes, it is. I think that would be their desire.
And so
let me just break in. All right, I have an opinion about this. How can we go to the planning board for a site plan review when we haven't established the uses that are specifically related to that site plan review? We need to establish the uses first. And it's my opinion, when you read the bylaw, that the bylaw doesn't even confer jurisdiction on the planning board in this circumstance. So I'll take that up, I suppose, with others, but it would be antithetical to the process to go to the planning board to get a site plan approval to come back to you, which might change based on your opinions of the use, to force us to go back to the planning board. It makes no sense.
So thank you, Jeff. And just to that point, and in an attempt to give the planning board to hear their thoughts and to respond to them, the site plan review provisions of the code, and now specifically I'm looking at 770.2, call for site plan review when a building other than a single family or two family dwelling shall be constructed, and I would be of the opinion we're not constructing such a building here, externally altered or enlarged, which I don't believe we're doing here. There will be some changes to the exterior of the building, but not the footprint. And no business or commercial use shall be expanded in ground area, which is not occurring here. Change from one type of business or commercial use to a different type of business or commercial use, not happening here. Except in conformity with such a site plan. I looked at this section of the code quite a bit. I didn't take lightly the chairperson of the planning board telling myself as chairperson of the zoning board that we should be sending an applicant for site plan review to the planning board. But as I look at this, I don't see how this application requires us, or for that matter, I don't see how this requires the applicant to go before site plan review for this application. I think the parking is an important question. I think everything we're raising is an important question, but I'm not raising this just so I could openly disagree with the planning board's assertion and request. I take no pleasure in that. But I do think it's important to mention that in this hearing, but that is where I stand there. I welcome any other members of the board discussing or giving their thoughts on that.
Anthony, once again, before, I'm just going to jump in on this issue, is what aspect of the site could possibly be properly thought about and changed for the better? The answer is none, because there is no site other than the building, basically, on this property. So I have a great concern that if I go to the planning board before you act, the planning board might say, we don't think your site is able to accommodate your use, and therefore we're not going to approve a site plan. And
I apologize for cutting you off. I think that's this board's purview. And I think the planning board doesn't necessarily disagree with that. I do not want to speak with them, but it's a little bit of a riddle wrapped in an enigma. But it was, when I reviewed the code, it was relatively cut and dry for me that I did not feel obligated to send this applicant for site plan review. Before we do turn it over to the public, just for this board, I would like to just maybe do one more rebound back to parking. I do think a lot of this application, especially in the jurisdiction we have, hinges on parking. The question of, we're removing a theater that required 73 spaces, or we had a building that with its uses required 73 spaces under the code. We have proposed a building which uses are changed. The theater going away, 4 condo units, 7 bedrooms, more importantly, to the parking coming in, and 900 square feet of retail remaining. That requires significantly less than 73 spaces, requires 12 spaces, as the applicant mentioned. That's not as concrete as those numbers sound. I think we all agree, because when parking is going to be most used for a condo and when it's going to be most used for a theater is obviously not exactly the same, but also I think we would all agree 73 and 12 is a big difference. I do think this board is required as part of this application to determine whether this is at least whether it's an unreasonable increase in parking demand, or really whether it's an increase in parking demand. And I'm not saying we need to decide that right now. I don't want to lose sight of that. There's a significant number of things to talk about here. From what I've seen and from what I reviewed in terms of the code and what we really are required to determine, I think that is at the top of the list for us tonight. Bob, did you have anything else to add?
Not really. Am I muted or can you hear me?
No, we can hear you.
Okay. No, I think that's true. I think you need to look at the external ramifications of this project, which are really, they relate to parking. There's no other, that's it. Internally, the use is becoming conforming from something that needed a special permit to be allowed, in that it was not conforming. So I think that issue doesn't, at least with me, become paramount. There's certainly, the theater needing all of those parking spaces is correct, but it needed them for 3 hours a day, probably no more than 3 or 4 days a week, the weekend, and, on very rare occasions, school vacation, a couple of other times during the week. The condos will need parking. If I have 2 cars, maybe one of them is going to be there most of the time in that space. I'll certainly have them both there overnight. And there's a difference between designated parking spaces and sort of free-for-all parking spaces. And I know the easement's been spoken about, and I understand how that works, but those spaces, will they be signed and designated and numbered the way the ones under the canopy are now signed and numbered? I don't necessarily, because the difference is so great, I don't necessarily think, in fact, I really don't think that's a deal breaker, but I think it's something, those issues are to be considered.
Certainly.
I just want to note to the board that there are other condominiums within Scituate Harbor that have no parking. And I also, leave it at that. I just had a senior moment.
All right.
Anthony, I just had one comment on 772A and its applicability. Now, as far as timing on the site plan administrative review, I'm not going to speak to that. That's different, but I do believe that 772A is in this situation applicable just for the statement that says no business or commercial use shall be expanded in ground area, comma, change from one type of business or commercial use to a different type of business or commercial use. And it would be my contention that if you're eliminating a movie theater and you're adding some other type of commercial use in at least a portion of that space, that would be applicable.
That's a great point, George. And I saw that language as well. But, when I look at that language, that tells me that every single change in a business space within the harbor requires a site plan review. And the spirit of that language really means when you're going from one type of non-conforming, when you're changing one type of business or commercial use to another type of business commercial use, that creates additional parking demand. It can't be reviewed in any other way.
Also, we're not going from one type of commercial use to another type of commercial use. In the building now, we have retail a theater in residential.
And I understand, yeah, I understand your point. And my point is, if you're completely eliminating one, right? Right. And let's agree that you're eliminating a particular type of commercial use for the purpose of this discussion. You're eliminating a theater, right? So you're converting that space to other types of a commercial, at least portion of it, to a different type of commercial use. Okay. If you were going from offices to offices plus a movie theater, right? I think we all agree this provision would be applicable. All right. So the question is it applicable because we're eliminating a movie theater and adding some retail space, the condos aside, right? Because it does not talk about residential use, right? It doesn't say if I take a commercial space and I convert it to residential use, you need to have site plan review, right? That's not what the provision says. So again, I understand Jeff, I understand your point. Look, this is a tough, it's a tough situation for the town, right? For all of us. I agree. You made a wonderful presentation today. Like and to Anthony's point, right? A closed business does not benefit the town, right? So I think we're all trying to do the right thing here. But we also need to be cognizant of what we can do and what we can't do and what the procedures are. So I just raised that. I just read it that particular provision, I just read it a little bit differently. But I do agree regarding the parking, to all of Ed's points, and Jeff, to many of your points about, where we are on this and kind of what kind of has to get done.
Thanks, George.
Obviously, the board's gonna have an opportunity to comment again, but unless anyone wants to add something, I was going to go to public comment. It looks like that's all right with you guys. And I would like to open it up to the condominium trust at first. I see Mr. Nikolai here. I imagine he's going to be speaking on their behalf. And because they represent so many abutters, I would like to give them the first opportunity. And just before I do that, a very well-written and detailed letter was submitted. I think it's fantastic, and I think the board wishes this would happen more often. It sounds like the applicant read the letter, reviewed it, was able to reach out to the abutter, in this sense, the condominium unit, work with them, come to a conclusion on some of these. I'm sure what they discussed, and I'm sure what everyone is aware of, is some of these very valid concerns that were raised in this letter about how construction in one place, especially in a building like a condo, affects abutters. Very valid concerns, very reasonable concerns I would have if I was there. Maybe not concerns for this board to address because they go well outside of zoning. It's more neighborly and legally what one neighbor has the right to do to another. I'm sure that's some of what was discussed, but I would like to give the condominium association an opportunity to speak first before we go to the rest of the public. So I am going to ask, it looks like you are unmuted, Mr. Nikolai. Are you available?
Yes, I am. Appreciate the opportunity to address the zoning board concerning this Scituate Harbor development request. As a follow-up to what Attorney DeLisi stated, we do want to go on record that on behalf of the trustees, we are not challenging Scituate Harbor Development's intention to repurpose the movie theater space, nor objecting to their proposed change. Now, certainly, we will defer to the judgment of the zoning board and the planning board. We recognize the conditions that have prompted the requested change, and our wish is for Scituate Harbor Development to succeed in finding an alternate use of the space. Warners are our neighbors and friends, and we do patronize their business. As trustees, though, we do have a fiduciary responsibility to act responsibly and prudently in serving the best interests of all of our owners. We recognize and appreciate your comments regarding the concerns that we have. But we're looking at this as the type of work that is involved, that is proposed, involves noise, dust, dirt, and certainly disruption of life during construction to our residents. So what we did in crafting our questions that we submitted, the intent was to minimize the inconvenience to the unit owners to the degree possible that we could. As I mentioned, we have subsequently met with the Warners and Attorney DeLisi and agree that the answers to the number of these questions lie with the contractor, who will be awarded the contract to perform the work, which of course is going to require approval by the board in permitting. It's our intent that our questions that we submitted and others that may arise be on record so that we can address, excuse me, the means and methods of construction with Scituate Harbor Development and the contractor in order to reach a satisfactory agreement that will minimize the impact it will have on the owners of the Scituate Harbor Condo Association. So we do look forward to working with them to make sure there is minimal disruption. With regards to the parking spaces that have been discussed at length, spaces along Old Dock Street are being used by boaters and their customers as early as 4 a.m. So, and signage also exists that states that it is for marina parking only. So in many ways, those spaces are not available to owners of the condo. This was noted during our meeting with Bob Warner and Attorney DeLisi, as we discussed how to preserve the parking rights granted to owners of 1 and 3 Mill Wharf and 132 Front Street by means of the easement that was filed. So we are confident that we can strike an arrangement with Scituate Harbor Development in achieving the necessary parking from our perspective. So that again, Mr. Chairman and the members of the board concludes our remarks, and certainly open it up to any questions that you may have.
I just want to say again, this board's job would be a lot easier if applicants and abutters that we often see with very valid concerns actually did get together more often leading up to a hearing like we've seen here. Bravo. I love to see it. There's still concerns, there's still interest. I totally understand. It's just that the conversation was had is wonderful.
Well, thank you. And we recognize that ongoing conversations, and as Attorney DeLisi said, I think we have reached a point of collaboration and of understanding that conversations need to take place to assure that our concerns are addressed with the construction if it goes forward.
Absolutely. And to your point about the record, I did express the point that I felt some of these concerns really were between the applicant and the association. This is part of the zoning file for this application. Your letter was submitted and received.
Thank you very much.
Of course. I see we have obviously the Zoom names are quite ending in Sully or Sully. If it looks like you are unmuted, if you could please.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, this is Brian Sullivan.
Hi, it is Sully. There it is. Hello, Brian.
It is I. Hello. And Mr. DeLisi and Mr. Warner, it is a pleasure to see you again. I was the chairman of the zoning board when this application first came in. It was my first hearing as the chairman of the zoning board. And I'm glad that Ed took the time to remember Brian Marshall. Brian worked tirelessly and gathered, as I recall, over 4,000 signatures to save the movie theater. And but for Brian's efforts, I don't know that the movie theater would have survived. I think the Warners looked at the business model of the movie theater and wondered if it could survive. And I think Brian single-handedly was able to show that the movie theater could be and would be an excellent anchor tenant for their future development. And to the Warners' credit, this was, Brian Marshall was a painter. He wasn't a member of the Board of Selectmen. He was a regular citizen of the town of Scituate, but he showed single-handedly what one person can do to make a difference. He gathered those signatures. He went to the Warners, and to the Warners' credit, they listened to Brian and what he had to say, and his 4,000 signatures behind him. And the Warners they designed their project around the movie theater, and they spent, as I recall, it was over $100,000 in soundproofing so that the residents above the movie theater would not be negatively impacted by the sounds coming from the movie theater. And if you think of it, if you're buying a condo and you have the choice to buy a condo that's not above a movie theater or one above a movie theater, you're going to go with the one that's not above a movie theater. But they were able to soundproof it to the extent that those condos all sold. And I've never heard a complaint that there were issues with the people that lived above the movie theater. So again, they were invested in the town. They were invested in the movie theater. And I think they did everything that they could to make that movie theater a viable cornerstone of that project. And unfortunately, times changed. And Ed mentioned the buggy whip factory. How many of us have, Disney or Hulu or Netflix? And how many of us have gone to see a movie in the movie theaters? Certainly before the pandemic, and then certainly post-pandemic. There was a movie theater at least in Maine that just shut down. The movie theater business is a dying business, sadly, and it's a shame. So the question is, what do you do with that space? And George mentioned that it's the board is in a difficult position, and the board has a difficult job in front of it. And I would respectfully disagree with that. If you apply the law to the facts of this application, the applicant does not need to be in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals. They can do what they want to do as a matter of right. They are eliminating a pre-existing non-conforming use. They are going for a conforming use. They are reducing the parking impact. But for the political impact of this proposal, they do not need to be in front of the board. Out of an abundance of caution, they applied to the board. And I understand the planning board wants to weigh in and they want their pound of flesh with a special permit application, but legally they have zero jurisdiction. I would argue, if I were representing Mr. Warner, that the zoning board technically does not have jurisdiction, not to take away from you the importance of your job. But the importance of your job, I think, is more political than it is legal. You need to give them and all of the however many people, the 40 people on the phone, you need to give everyone their day in court so that they can weigh in. I read Jim Hunt's posting on Scituate Monthly in the 450 comments and all the nostalgic comments about the wonderful times that people had at the movie theater and how this is the death of the harbor. And I read all of that and it makes me sad. But how many people that posted on that stream or on that thread, how many of those people had been to the movie theater in the last 6 months? How many of those people have patronized Flowers and Festivities or have gone to Silverstorm or have gone to Dribbles or have gone to the Hibernian or Oro or any of the harbor businesses? Galley, Mulaney's. And I can walk down Front Street, I can point to all the businesses where where I patronize or where I used to work when I was a kid. I used to work at the Welch Company when I was a kid. But all these businesses, they change, they evolve, they grow. And sadly, some of them die. And I think it's the height of contradiction for the planning board to loathe the open retail spaces in the harbor and then to say you can't put residences, you should put in retail, which of course would just be more vacant space in the harbor. Now, again, getting back to 770.2, you're not adding any demand on parking. You're substantially reducing the demand on parking. I think your charge is clear. I think as a matter of right, they are entitled to a finding, and then they can move forward with their building permit. And I wish nothing but the best for you, my friends on the zoning board, and I wish nothing but the best for the Warners. Thank you for your time.
Anthony, if I just jump in while the next person appears to have raised their hand, it just occurred to me that since we are in a harbor business district that allows businesses and retail as of right, there's nothing that prevents anybody from buying any one of these residential units from operating a business also. So in the future, there's a possibility that that could convert back if the market forces bear it to retail. It just occurred to me to think about that as of right, without any need, to petition any board, in my estimation. So that's all.
Anthony, you're muted.
I've been unmuted. Now we have a phone number with a hand up ending in 699.
6699, yeah.
Yes. But it looks like we're trying to unmute that person.
Good evening. Hello, you can hear me. My name is Margaret Laughlin. I am at S26 in the One Mill Wharf building. I have a couple of concerns that I just want to point out. I agree with the parking issue that you're all discussing. I live here full time. I see the parking issue as a major problem for anybody that's going to have overnight parking. First of all, we're flooding on a regular basis, and I haven't heard that concern brought up, but I am under the canopies, and I am one of the last spaces. And over the last few years, I've had to actually move my car because the water has come up so high. So not only is parking an issue, but there's also a water issue as well. The other issue is I debate Larry's question, Larry Nicolai from the association, that maybe the board may have approved this or is in favor of this, but I don't think all of the residents are. I have heard from my next door neighbor, which is N24. I've heard from multiple neighbors in this area that will be very, very concerned about the redevelopment, partly because One Mill Wharf building has had major issues. We've had 4 major floods. We've had major rot and water damage in this building. And recently the board had a company that goes in and evaluates building structures. It's called SPS. We have a full report that basically says that the building wasn't constructed originally properly. And you'd know this better than I. It has to do with the envelope that protects the building. So areas of this building are stressed. So that's a concern for most of the residents in here because we're leaking. The other thing is that the parking that we have under the canopy is deeded. So if you have a guest, you have an issue with parking. Where are you going to put them? You can't put them overnight because Cole Parkway is off. And there has been some concerns, and there has been flyers put on our cars telling us that we cannot park behind the Welsh building. So those are my comments, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Looks like Mr. Nikolai.
Yes, just a point of clarification regarding the repurposing or the reuse of a unit back to commercial. If indeed it becomes a residential unit, our bylaws prevent the use of that unit for any business purposes.
Thank you. Yes, it's always, obviously, and I see Attorney DeLisi shaking his head. We talk about the zoning code, but then we get into other land use restrictions, private restrictions, obviously condominium restrictions, things can get quite interesting. So it does not look like we have any other members of the public with their hand up. Just going to make sure of that.
You have one,
You do have one that just.
Debbie
raised-
Farrell.
There you go.
Let's go ahead with Debbie.
Yes, hi, my name's Debbie Farrell. I'm from 124 Front Street. You may know me through previous meetings that I've had with the board. Our 124 Front Street was all over the 2001 Mill Wharf development there at that time. We were deemed as by the 1988 bylaw that we couldn't have parking. In which case the others did, 1 and 2. They had the designated parking. So my question is, the new residents that are going to be there, are they or are they not having designated parking? Is that correct? They're over in Cole Parkway?
Attorney DeLisi, would you?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Debbie, for your question. My view of the easement that I provided to the board, I'm not certain whether we have the right to designate those spaces as a pertinent to specific units. So it's something that I'm looking into, but I don't. Right now, there is no intention, there is no plan, not to say that will change, to designate those spaces. There's a couple of thoughts on the issue of parking that I just wanted to raise. And these are really just kind of ideas that are, if you look closely at the plans, on the exterior of the building on the south-facing facade near the steps of the theater, there's a loading zone. That's part of Cole Parkway, okay? And that loading zone, I think, I'm not entirely actually certain what the purpose was, but we show a concept of maybe creating some parking in that particular location. That really is not up to us, right? That's up to the town of Scituate. And I'm sure the board would encourage us to explore with the town of Scituate that concept, and I'm happy to, because any chance we can to grab some extra spaces, I think is helpful. I also wanted to point out that even though 7 bedrooms are proposed, only 4 units are proposed, and I know that that there are areas of your bylaw that, for instance, in the Greenbush area, there was a recent approval on Old Country Way, and I think that there's a parking kind of bonus scenario, whereas if you create housing in a multi-use building, that you don't need 1 parking space per every bedroom. It might be like slightly less than that or altered. So, but I think the point is that just because that's what your chart says, it doesn't, certainly you need to plan for it, but in the context of the area where we can't plan for it here on this property, it might be rational to view it as more likely that there would probably be only 4 cars that would be, really cars associated truly dedicated, if you would, to the units. And it's just a point that maybe might be worth consideration of the board. That's all.
Okay, the reason why I'm asking is because we didn't have the privilege of having the deeded parking when in 2001, when the development of Mill Wharf 1 and 3 was being developed. I went to the town numerous times saying, hey, we are being flooded. We are getting ticketed. There's a new parking structure there, A, B, C, D. It's basically to help with the businesses. Therefore, A would only be 15 minutes and B and so forth. And D is overnight. In saying that, so you have the new people that are going to be over in Cole Parkway. We acknowledge that probably more than likely that's what's going to happen. So my actual question is for the town. I've requested at the very least harbor resident stickers so that we are not subject to towing. We're not subject to the tickets, that we don't need to be subjected to designated area. If we need to be able to, I've heard today that times change. Well, they have changed from 2001 to 2020. Times have changed, where I know that you guys think that this is reduction of parking. It's a lot of marina visitors. It's the Mill Wharf restaurant has well, obviously there's a lot of parking there, or sorry, a lot of use there. So we're being flooded. We're being towed. We can't get there. Whether it be Heritage Days, whether it be First Friday, whether it be any time from Thursday to Sunday in the summertime. We need to be able to know that we are not going to be subjected to that. And we need a permanent solution, because as much as you say that it's a reduction, we all know it's not.
Ma'am, just so I'm clear, you said 121 Front Street, right?
24.
You're on the
124.
124.
Thank you. Okay. And 124 is a portion of this condominium or not?
Nope. So 124 is on Front Street.
Right. I follow you. That was just a point of clarification. So as you're absolutely raising valid points here about parking, and I understand your desire as a resident of the harbor to have the right to park in the public lot overnight. It is not something that this board has the power to grant or even push for. And it's also not a portion of this application. This applicant is not seeking the right to park overnight in the public parking. So I think it's important to clarify that. Attorney,
yeah, thank you, Debbie. Great comments. Your condo was one of the condos that I was referring to because I was aware that you guys don't have parking, and the condo was apparently approved without it. I'm sure that you would greatly be positively affected if you had the use of an easement behind the Welch Company building at night, especially when you could take advantage of that and know that when you do park there at night, it's not likely that there are going to be other bustling businesses vying for those spaces at night. And so I think that your suggestion of harbor resident stickers is a fantastic idea. And I would encourage the board that if the board were also agreed with that, and we're going to approve this project, that the board contain in its decision some language that encourages the town, especially the Traffic Rules and Regulations Committee, to consider something like that, because with the swag of the board behind it, perhaps Debbie would have more likely success. And I could already tell you that we'd be happy to partner with Debbie and use whatever means we have available to try to influence a change like that. It's overdue and it should happen.
Thank you.
I think it's most important to mention that you may be overestimating the swag or
Just came on.
of this board. Also, for me personally, I think we got a lot on our plate right now. I think we're crossing the 10 o'clock hour, and I think that this board making a recommendation that a resident that lives within the confines of Front Street has some more advanced right to the public parking spaces in Cole Parkway than someone who doesn't live in that area is a complex issue that may have warrants, and maybe it's something this board can take up and form a position on one day. Especially at 10 o'clock, I don't think that's something that we necessarily want to tack on to this application.
It's Debbie Farrell again.
Hi, Debbie.
Okay, well,
Okay.
okay.
Hi,
Paul Gensheimer.
My name
is
is
on the
Paul
phone.
Gensheimer. I also live at 124 Front Street. I just wanted to clarify something briefly. And I know it's 10 o'clock at night and everybody wants to move on with their lives and evenings.
Debbie handed you the microphone, right? You're not someone else who took her spotlight.
No, correct.
Okay.
I will, let's
She-
see if I can get my video going.
No, I believe you. I take
There we
Okay.
are. There we
Yeah.
are.
So anyway, on the original ZBA approval or whatever from 2001, the addresses were Mill Wharf 1 and 3, 132 Front Street and 124 Front Street, which is where we're located at. And however, the parking failed to be, I think at the time, 124 Front Street was owned by the Warners. They were apartments, and parking was allowed in the Mill Wharf parking lot as they were in control of the parking lot as well. I did notice earlier in this conversation, probably about an hour and a half ago now, that Attorney Orenberger referred to these units in the movie theater as apartments and or units, but not as condominiums. And that's where our problem arose, is where the parking was granted for 124 Front Street as they were apartments controlled by the Warners. But when they turned into condominiums, then parking was becoming no longer allowed in the Mill Wharf parking lot. So my question for the board is, if these units in the existing movie theater begin as apartments controlled by a single owner, when they're sold off to condominiums eventually, will their parking will their parking go away with the ownership as well?
So just to answer part of that question, the easement, the recorded easement that the condominium association that this applicant is part of have rights in was granted to the condominium. And sometimes condominiums can be a little bit of a misnomer. When we hear condominium, we think of a residential apartment-like unit, but it's a little bit unique in that the movie theater as it existed was actually a unit within the condominium. Jeff, you've reviewed the master deed more than me. That's correct, yes?
Yes.
That's correct. The movie theater is a separate unit, and there are probably 3 other units, I think, on that floor at the moment.
Units
Yeah.
there. So it's totally understandable how it's a bit confusing, but this particular condominium, you living in a separate condominium, which is a separate development, this particular condominium has right.
No, my point at the beginning was that if you look at any of the applications from 2001, 124 Front Street is included in the entire development with 132 Front Street, the Welch Company, and Mill Wharf 1 and 3, because they were all owned by the same person at the time.
I totally understand what you're saying there. Another important distinction is the parking rights in the Mill Wharf lot that this condominium has were granted privately. They privately obtained them from the private owner of the Mill Wharf lot. That was not a function of the town permitting or granting parking to one condominium and not another. That was a private acquisition that it appears they likely would have paid, or there would have been some financial considerations there.
So is there, is parking by town bylaw, is parking required for condominiums but not for apartments? Is there a difference? Is that a different use?
An apartment building and a condominium is technically a different use. Bob can comment
thank you.
as to whether our parking requirements are different. But I do want to be clear that
But you are saying that an apartment building and a condominium is a different use.
I'd just say it's multifamily, it'd be the same.
Yeah.
My point is, when this building was converted from an apartment building to condominiums which were private ownership, was that a change of use or not?
I don't believe this building was ever an apartment building.
It absolutely was. These were sold off to private condominiums in 2003 after the construction of Mill Wharf 1 and 3.
They're talking about their units, Anthony, not the ones at issue here, not 1 and 3.
I think if that's correct, I think that's an important point. We're talking about a building and the rights of a building that are not subject to the application.
Okay, but will the new units in the movie theater, are those going to be apartments? Or will those be private condominiums that will be bought by private people and owned by private people who purchase without deeded parking?
The latter. Private.
So they'll be purchasing that without deeded parking. They'll be privately owned units.
That is
Condominiums, yep.
Okay.
Just point of clarification is the architect used the word condominium there. I've been trying to encourage the Warners to consider potentially apartments. We haven't decided, probably leaning towards condos, but just wanted to be clear on that.
Maybe it does need to go to site plan review.
I just want to preface that, obviously in 2001, we were not allowed the parking because we were existing structure. That's what we were told, existing structure, and in which case we didn't have parking. So we're over at Cole Parkway. So what you're now saying is that you guys are going by that 1988 bylaw where existing structure, but in 2001, you didn't go by that bylaw. You got designated.
We're going down a bit of a rabbit hole, but I'm almost certain that there was no scenario where the town didn't allow your condominium development to have parking. It's a question of private rights in real estate. This condominium has private rights, private easement parking rights in a private parking lot. And while I'm not specifically familiar with the title and rights of your condominium, it sounds like yours doesn't. Permitting without parking doesn't mean you are requiring a condominium to not have parking.
Just to stay on track with the meeting itself, the only clarification we're looking for definitively is, will the new 4 proposed units in Mill Wharf 1, will those be condominiums or will they be apartments? Because there's a difference when it comes to what the town needs to grant for deeded parking.
If I may suggest, at the time in 2001, the discussion was that the impact of parking in the Harbor District of the 600 plus seat theater impacted parking a great deal. That the proposed redevelopment of the project, which included 124, would reduce the impact on town parking. There was no exclusive use of town parking areas for this project. It was simply an understanding that the existing use of town parking would continue, but in a less impactful way. In addition, the project included some covered parking between 1 and 2, which was assigned and designated for owners of the units in 1 and 2. Whether it's apartments or condominiums, I would suggest, and Mr. DeLisi can confirm this one way or the other, the space that we're reviewing is part of the existing condominium units, which have rights to that easement. So these 4 new units would have rights in that easement, but the easement doesn't.
Regardless.
It doesn't apply to designated space.
That's 100% correct, Ed. And I just wanted to note to the board that the application before the board is for condominium units presently. And I can tell you with 100% certainty, if calling them apartments is gonna trip a requirement for a site plan review, then I'm probably gonna scrap that concept entirely if I ever was even interested in entertaining it in the first place.
But I think it's condos, not condos. That space is a unit in the condominium right now. It's a commercial unit in the condominium. If it became apartments, it would still have rights in the easement that the condominium as a whole has rights in. If it becomes individual residential condo units, it would have rights in that easement. None of those potential uses or variations affect the rights that it does or doesn't have in that easement.
Okay. Well, in closing, I'd just like to say that I don't have my calculator in front of me, but I believe there's about 189 spots in the Mill Wharf parking lot, somewhere there about plus or minus 5%. But if you want to add up the seats in the Mill Wharf restaurant, the slips in the Mill Wharf Marina, all the other obligations of the businesses, and especially the owners of Mill Wharf 1 and 3, who have had parking issues for a long time for their 2 spots that they should have had, is there enough room to add even those minuscule 10 to 12 spots that are being discussed? Is there even room for that?
It's a valid question, but at the same time, it's a private lot.
Yes, but isn't a restaurant subject or a marina subject to certain amounts of parking?
The decision, the restaurant was put in with an understanding of its impact on the lot. The development of the former Welsh Company property also impacted the lot. It's always been understood that there is public parking available in the Harbor District. I think there's a legitimate argument as to whether or not the town can create a no overnight parking situation where the public parking in the town is desired and by residents in the district. But so I do think the proposal for a harbor resident sticker is a delightful idea.
We agree.
Thank you.
And I think that should probably be pursued by the town, because obviously when this project was developed, there was no easement for parking in the Mill Wharf area except for the covered parking between 1 and 2. The rest of it was the easement that's there was, I think I just looked, I think it was 2007. That was a separate private transaction between the condominium association and presumably the Warners at the time, or the Warners who are the owners of that parcel of land. But the rest of the Mill Wharf parking area, the former Welsh Company parking area, is now, as I understand it, held by another entity, and they negotiating for rights in that parking area would be between that private entity and those who are negotiating with them. this project, when it was approved in 2001, was based on parking that was available in the Cole Parkway area and being utilized by a 600-seat theater, as well as parking in the on the private land that was being utilized by the lumberyard and the other various businesses that were demolished as part of this construction.
I agree.
We just have to have some, protection. We're harbor residents. We pay 45,000 property taxes collectively between Goodies and Out of the Blue and Gallery and seven units. And we're being told, I got a ticket last week. And we just feel that it's we've heard tonight that times change. We have residents that or the residents here that they're home. They're remote as well. So yeah, times did change, and we can't be getting towed and not being able to get home at night. So thank you, Ed.
Janine, regardless of the outcome of this application, would you please put a note on our next meeting, an agenda line item to discuss that? The idea of us, it warrants some discussion.
Yeah, I would agree too, Anthony. I'm in support of that as well. I think it's a really good idea and a good solution. We're just not it's not our charge to solve that, but we need to figure out who can solve that.
Yeah, I think we need to discuss it, whether we discuss reaching out to another board, we discuss an official ZBA opinion on it.
I was in front of Brad Washburn. I was in front of Bob.
I don't think he's here anymore, right?
No, he doesn't work for the town anymore.
Yeah, I know.
But I think we could probably.
We've been doing this for years.
We've been
doing
I think
this for years.
I think we could probably put something together to, maybe put it on the map,
I feel strongly we got
raise
to
the conversation.
taking a while. We're getting late in the evening, and I do want to keep that separate because I think it deserves to be separate. But I am very open to making that an official agenda line item for the board to at least discuss at our next hearing.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you. And it may be a solution for the
Yes.
potential new residents of the movie theater.
It is obviously definitely not entirely unrelated to this application. Absolutely. Thank you. We scrolling through to see any other hands. I don't see any other hands. And with that, I'm coming back to the board, and maybe Attorney DeLisi, quickly, you raised earlier that you were seeking a finding, and am I correct that maybe you're seeking more than one finding, or at least not an incredibly linear singular finding?
So 3 findings. One, under section 820, that the proposed change is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than what's there now, I think is the finding that's required under 820. And then secondly, I was looking for an official finding that the parking on this property pre-exists the 1988 date, and therefore it's exempt. And then
sorry, before
Mike,
we
yeah,
get to the third finding, would you agree that it's a little more nuanced than exempt, not exempt, because I think your contention, and please correct me if I'm misinterpreting, is that it's exempt if we are in agreement that this modification of uses doesn't increase demand.
correct.
So it's really a finding that we're not increasing demand, and therefore it's exempt from further parking requirement.
Exactly. And that's exactly the finding that the board made for the Hamilton Company and the decision that I provided to the board in 2000, and I think it might have been 7. And then the third finding, in light of tonight's discussion, and I believe that the board has the authority to make the finding, and I think that Bob would welcome the finding, Bob Vogel, that is, that in light of the previous 2 findings, that a site plan review is not required.
Okay.
Thank you.
Um,
Well, can we make that third finding? I question whether the board can make that third finding.
I think if Bob Vogel's here now and Bob says to you, I think it's above, my pay grade, I'd like you to weigh in on it. I'm not sure it would have some kind of binding legal effect because of the procedure that's required. So ordinarily, Ed, in this circumstance, I would be I'd be going to the building inspector first and saying to the building inspector, I have my zoning decision. I'd like you to issue a building permit. And he would look at the zoning bylaw and say, I'll either issue the permit because you've done what you're required to do, or I believe that you need to go to the planning board to get site plan review. If he were to say the latter, it would then be my ability under state law to appeal that determination to this board to determine whether his determination in that circumstance is correct. And so rather than going through that procedure, since Bob is here now, I think that the board probably can at the very least weigh in and give Bob some guidance since we're all here.
And Ed, I agree with your question completely. And it was a question that I had in looking at the code, because the code makes it clear who performs a site plan review and doesn't explicitly make it clear, I think, that we determine whether one is necessary or not. Instead, it jumps a little bit and makes us the decider of whether something that doesn't requirement, it can go forward. But in that vacuum of who exactly decides if it's required, I had the chairperson of the planning board calling me, encouraging me to express to the board that we should send this application for site plan review, which again, I didn't have the chance to fully discuss that with the planning board, but that would at least to me seem to imply that if it's up to any of these boards to determine whether that process is necessary, it would be us. But I agree with you, that is not black and white to me, but I would agree. And Bob, please, if you have anything to add, I think our opinion on that, given that I know Bob has been asked a question and that the planning board reached out to the zoning board to ask us to do that, I think that it seems to me that the planning board thinks that we are in a position to make that determination. And I'm of the opinion that the only other board that would be in a position to make that determination is them.
I would argue that and I think Jeff articulated it well. The challenge is it would typically be the code enforcement officer, building inspector, who would stipulate whether or not he's able to issue a permit with or without the review. And as Jeff said, if the building inspector refused to issue a permit, it would be appealed to us, and we are the deciding factor as to whether the building inspector is correct or not. So I'm not comfortable putting it as part of the decision, I don't feel, but I think that within the 4 corners of the published article, we could have a discussion and we could take a poll as to whether or not, in this board's opinion, it requires a special, a planning board review.
Yeah, the other thing is, Anthony, I don't think that finding was advertised, right? So that's something that's different than what was asked for at the beginning. And I think when the application was made, there's an application that's presented to Bob, and then Bob has to sign off, essentially that, this doesn't comply, you got to go to ZBA, right? So he makes a determination that he can't issue a permit. And then it comes, that's how it gets to us. So that's the vehicle that gets to us.
Right.
I think the application has to be made for that issue to get to us, especially where it wasn't advertised. I don't think we can just ad hoc.
You're raising a very good point. At the same time, it's not that uncommon for us to add additional findings to a decision that weren't advertised in the application. Doesn't necessarily make it right, but it's certainly something we've done before. We've tacked on another finding that has come up in our conversation of an application.
But Tom, you raise a really good point. Ed, very articulate as usual. I'm perfectly comfortable with just the polling on this issue. I don't need a finding, but I think that it's something that, unless Bob were to speak up right now and say, I don't think a site plan review is required, it just would save all of us time and energy and effort. If you were just to give him a signal as to what your opinion was, it still is his decision. So that's kind of where I'm at. I think a poll is perfectly legit there.
Well, it would also appear to me that if the planning board feels strongly that they do have review rights here, they could appeal Bob's right to issue the building permit and then kick it back to us. And then we would have the debate and we'd be one board arguing with another board. But at least it would be, prior to going there, at least we'd have had that bit of discussion publicly and openly, and the planning board would have heard where we are standing.
So let me just weigh in at this point. Am I unmuted?
You are, absolutely.
Your findings are going to include an opinion, at least, that the parking requirements are not increased by this change. In my mind, that's the only decision to be made. It's a decision that the board, your board, can make. I don't think you can argue credibly that this change will be more detrimental to the neighborhood. You can't argue that it triggers any of the provisions of 770.2A, even since you change from one commercial use to another one, or from a building not in commercial use to a commercial use within that building. Again, residential use is allowed by right in the harbor. There's no stipulation as to which floor it can or can't be on. I certainly agree with the planning board's vision and master plan that an ideal utopian situation would be to have thriving commercial restaurants, various things like that on the ground floor, and restrict residential use to floors above that. But I understand perfectly why, first, this building is not particularly adaptable to that, since it doesn't largely front on any real public space. like Front Street, or even most of it doesn't front on even Cole Parkway. So I think I would be very content with this board making the decision that the parking situation was not exacerbated, that this didn't create a need of more parking spaces than previously, and those parking spaces couldn't be accommodated or weren't accommodated by the plan. And based on that, issuing a building permit would be the logical thing to do.
So there we go. Thank you, Bob. Unless anyone from the board has anything else to add or any more questions, I'm going to make a motion that the application before us and the conversion from a movie theater to 4 residential condo units as laid out on the January 11th, 21 first floor plan of Mill Wharf Plaza Development Project by Carr, Lynch, and Sandell does not increase parking demand from what was present at the site previously and is not more detrimental to the surrounding neighborhood.
You just want to do that? All right.
I
can
am not married to that specific motion by any means.
No, I can second that.
All those in favor, Bucieri, aye.
Tibbetts, aye.
Kavanaugh, aye.
George and Susan, why don't you go ahead?
George and Susan are muted.
Susan, that was an aye. I think I didn't catch it, but
Sorry, Harrison, aye.
Yeah, Xixis, aye. I think I'm convinced.
all right. The ayes have it.
And I think whether it's probably not necessary, but just to put a fine point on it, the 2001 application regarding parking was all about reduction in the impact of the public parking spaces. It had nothing to do with assigning parking other than those spaces that were defined between 1 and 2. And to the degree that there are parking impacts by the units in this condo association, which include the theater, this reduces the impact on public parking by number of spaces used. One can argue about whether 73 hourly evening spaces is equivalent, but clearly 12 overnight spaces is a significant reduction in the 73 spaces.
Well, thanks everyone. That was a bit of a marathon, but I think we had some good discussion and that was very effective. I really appreciate it.
Hey, I just wanted to close out. Thank you very much for the, I think it was a good collaborative discussion. We all have a stake in this, and thank you for listening to our discussion and argument and being thoughtful in your responses. I didn't know if you wanted me to draft the initial decision, which is very customary. In this circumstance, I'm more than happy to do that, but if you wanted to do it, I would understand.
I'll tell you what, I'll claim that one, and I'll ask Jeff if he would give me a draft before I send it in.
Okay, so and I'll send it off to the board, and I'll let Janine send it to you. How's that, Ed?
Sounds perfect to me.
Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Janine, do we have anything else to, nice, we see you on video there.
We do have minutes, but there's 6 months worth. So if you want to do a portion of them or all of them, or if you want to delay it to another meeting, that's fine too.
Did everyone have a chance to review them and do a quick vote, or do you want to punt it? It's rather late. I'm fine with any of that.
I've been able to review them and I feel comfortable approving them.
George and Tom.
Yeah, that's fine.
Content wise, I'm good with all of them. I think one of them had my name misspelled at one point, but I think they're good.
Motion to approve the 6 months of meeting minutes that Janine had circulated, provided we correct George's name spelling.
Second.
Thank you.
All those in favor? Bucieri? Yeah.
David's aye.
Speaks aside.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn.
Kevin, all right. Well, I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. Second. Everyone,
Aye.
by human decency. Thank
you,
you,
Mr.
everyone.
Chairman.
That was a big one.
Thank you, Anthony.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Well done.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
everyone.
Good night, all.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Brianna.
Thank you. Thank you, Brianna.
Brianna, for staying.
Of course, happy to help.
You're still here. Oh, there you are. You're still here.
I'm here.
It's a challenge. We appreciate it.
Thank you.